The opinions expressed by the members of our panel do not necessarily reflect those of this station, its owners, or management.
Chicago, the town that Billy Sunday could not shut down. Chicago, Chicago, that town. Things they don't do on Forest. They have the time of their life. I saw a man, he danced with his wife in Chicago, Chicago, my hometown.
From the John DeVita Recording Studio, it's once again time for our monthly roundtable program, Meet the Chicago Historians. Today we present our November edition, recorded for posterity on this 19th day of November in the year of our Lord 2012. Now here he is, everybody's favorite electronics troubleshooter and jack of all trades, John DeVita.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rich, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast of Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, November the 19th, and this is the year 2012 or 2012. Our panel today will be talking about the American presidencies, past campaigns, and men who fought for them, the most recent presidential sweepstake of 2012, and historical first elections cycles. And now, to start today's broadcast, here is our announcer, Richard Lang.
And now here's our panel moderator, Jack Ryan.
Good afternoon. Welcome. It's a beautiful November day, and we're having a good time as usual, folks. We just love to get together. We can't wait, and we hope you enjoy it. And this is the second time that we're doing a sort of a second, follow-up to our previous show. We've done this with labor before, which went over very well, was well received. And in as much as this is the season for presidential talk, and I think we just had an election, and one way or another, we're all over it by now, and we'll get into that too. Talk a little about that, but we're going to, of course, we're going to talk different, unusual situations that happen during election, like the business with this electoral college. But some people don't get it. They went to the same school you and I did. They went to the same classes. They took their civics. I remember in 2000 with this Florida business, someone said to me about the electoral college, when did they start that? And I said, well, I think it was 1789 when it was ratified, right? But you just wonder sometimes. Anyway, before we get to that, we got to know what's going on around town. And we had got to mention, we just had the funeral of Captain Herbie Johnson last week of the Chicago Fire Department, and which made all the news. And I know the family well, and I think Bill Kugelman, did you know him?
Yes, I did work with him. Herbie did some work over at the museum for me, in fact. Mm-hmm. And brought the rig over, and we used them, and he was quite a guy.
Yeah, the family. He sounded like he was just like his father, and he has a couple of brothers. One's a paramedic, and is the other fireman too, or a couple of.
The other one is a fireman, right?
I know one of his younger brothers, that would be Teddy, went to grade school with my older daughter Jennifer, all the way through kindergarten, 8th grade. And we knew the family. I don't think I ever met him, though, that I can think of, because he was the oldest one. And
right.
And anyway, this just goes.
I've never seen not even a multiple death of our job. I've never seen a turnout like this one was. It was really heartwarming.
I know they had it at St. Rita Chapel, which is St. Rita High School, the new campus, not the old one. The one that this was formerly Quigley South. There's a lot of room there. It's a big chapel, and there's a lot of room around there, and it was still crowded. I was in line 4 hours myself. Wednesday night. And anyway, it was it's very touching. But it just struck me the other day that how many times someone like yourself, Bill, or someone like even me, you go to work and you actually did do something heroic, but you don't even think about it because it's part of the job. But it's obvious when the Lord calls you home that they kind of underlying the whole thing and the whole job that way and the whole career.
You know what? He's the boss.
That's right.
He's the boss, and when he calls,
we know not the hour,
you
the hour
can't
of the
say,
day, right?
hold it a minute. You know?
Yeah. No timeout. Nothing.
No timeouts in that.
But,
believe me, personally, I know too. I've gone through it. So
it's still something you don't get over so easily, no matter
Right.
what. And it was good to see the family there. And I know the family appreciated everything that all of us did. Anyone who came by just to say, you know, we want to express our condolences.
I thought it was great that COTV not taped, that it was live, the whole ceremony of his funeral.
Mhm.
I thought that was really something that I've never seen before. You know? So it hasn't happened in a while, but and of course, you know, everything happens in threes. You know, a little while later, the other guy who's being buried, I believe Wednesday, this Wednesday, and then Mike Boyd, not in the line of duty, but nobody really knows how he got this real rare form of cancer, Kawasaki's disease, and there just is no cure at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Ironically, Kawasaki disease is traced back to having your rugs cleaned.
Oh,
And as a child, you can breathe this certain chemical that the fibers themselves promote.
and it attacks the stomach.
That's right.
And there is no registered or you know
Right.
cure that has been okayed by the government. That's why
Right.
he couldn't even afford the experimental treatment.
Exactly, I could understand it, and that is when they were looking into crib disease, crib death for children.
Oh, okay.
That possibly those children were crawling on the floor or something just within ironic. Not that that's the cause, but that is somehow how that is.
I think one of the chemicals you're talking about is formaldehyde,
Well,
because formaldehyde is used in a lot of.
yeah.
Is an off product, I guess, to the.
I think that's banned.
Yeah, it is
Formaldehyde is
banned, but
banned now.
But possibly years ago, you know,
yeah,
as you
years
go
ago
through
they
life.
had it, and it was mostly in stuffed furniture and rugs because the fibers were synthetic.
That was in high school. We used formaldehyde in our biology class.
Yeah, you got a little
Dissecting-
tickled there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dissecting frogs. and
Yeah,
all
I
that
mean-
stuff that
Exactly.
they did.
How many firemen with that? You know, before
Well,
they
there you
banned
are,
it,
like when
it was
we.
all fire extinguishers.
Right,
That's all they were.
exactly. Now,
Was that
it's
carbon
like,
tet too?
as-
Carbon tet.
Carbon
used to put-
tet, yeah.
Used to put in
Yeah,
that. It's supposed to be
carbon
very
tet.
damaging, was
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, carbon tetrachloride was primarily used as a cleaner.
Yeah.
It can be used for fire suppressant, but it was very volatile and
And so years ago, your paint even, you know, how we used to use that calamine and, you know, that cheapest way to paint and all that. These are
element I'm not sure
no,
about. But,
I don't think it had
That's
its
not the name
big
of it,
problem,
yeah.
but
Yeah, but there was.
but I'm saying there's a
My
correlation.
dad's favorite tonic when I was small and up until the teens was turpentine hydrate with codeine. And now that's of course completely on the list.
Well, years ago, a spoon of sugar with a drop of kerosene was a cure for your throat. I mean, so we've thank goodness
Kerosene?
came. Yes,
Yeah.
kerosene.
Yeah.
They mentioned that on the
That's-
Dust
I never-
Bowl series
Oh,
last
really?
night.
Never heard that.
Ken Burns' new series on the Dust Bowl
Oh,
mentioned
it
that.
was on last
Yeah.
night.
Did anyone watch that or see any of it? Or?
Yes, I did.
I was a little
Yeah,
bit.
I saw. I was in the mood for it. I just couldn't handle that.
Yeah, it was too
such
depressing.
It was
I turned
depressing.
it off when they started killing those. When they started killing those rabbits, I turned it off.
That was a. Seems like people go in cycles about stupidity, because you go through the Dust Bowl and then you go through the Great Depression, which is actually almost at the tail end of
They're
that.
the same
it
thing.
just
Yeah.
kind of went
Threshold.
right through.
Yeah.
And
You,
then
you,
now
you
with
speak
this
about
latest-
cycles of stupidity. We just came through the presidential election.
That
Don't get ahead of
really
ourselves now.
started
I was going to say with the Dust Bowl, supposedly this was the product of like 75 years of farming on marginal land that really didn't have that much rainfall. It was okay as long as the rainfall. Once you had the dry spell, that was it.
They had dry spell periodically.
Yeah, but I mean really
We
dry
had it
spell.
this
But this was
last
several
summer.
years of drought.
Yes.
But do you know there was one guy who was so dumb that when he heard that Ken Burns was doing a show about the Dust Bowl, he said, "Which two teams are playing?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be
Oh.
surprised. Ooh. But yeah, it's like you go with this latest depression or recession or whatever you want to call it. It was speculation on property, and it caused the property prices to go up, and all of a sudden it hit a plateau. The credit came down or whatever it was, and everybody had problems. And that was the same problem with the original 1929 depression.
Crash.
When they had marginal on your, it was 5% margin on your stock.
Oh yeah, margin. Yeah,
And
that's
they-
what killed
they-
everybody were the
and
margin
somebody started
calls.
calling. They started
Margin
calling,
calls.
and all of a sudden, this was a big cycle, and everything went down to two.
You could buy $1,000 worth of stock for $100.
Yeah.
Sure, everybody. In those days, people that couldn't afford to buy stock were buying stock. If you had $5, you put it in shares. One of my favorite Groucho stories. Groucho Marx, famous comedian. Everybody knows Groucho Marx. I'm assuming one of his favorite stories was he says he went to go see his good friend Eddie Cantor at a matinee performance in the Winter Garden Theater, and he says Eddie Cantor tipped him off on some blue chip stock. So he spent $25,000 on this stock. He said the next day the market crashed and he lost everything. He said, I don't care what anybody says, but $25,000 to go see a short Jew in blackface roll his eyeballs around his head is too much money.
What a description, huh? Isn't it ironic? I've read a lot about the Dust Bowl, but isn't there quite a correlation now of the things that were happening? You know, they made their loans to make their farming, and they sold things for, say, they used to get $1, now they got 50 cents if the cattle wasn't in good condition, and
We continually make the same mistakes
lost-
over and over. Yeah.
Lost their businesses, lost their homes, tried over and over and over,
Yeah.
gave their last penny, and it seems like, sadly enough, we're a little bit into that right now.
No, that's
And,
We just went through a severe drought
Yeah.
over the summer. Over this last summer, we went through a drought which ruined a lot of the crops, although
And
not
all
so
the-
severe where it went on for years and years, but we don't know. Now, if
and
we
the
get a-
weather changes.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
seems to have some.
When did you ever see New York get hit with a hurricane like this? Never in my lifetime, so.
Yes, and,
Well, that
and
was a,
another to come this week.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, my
yeah.
Lord.
that was a circumstance that was really unusual because you have the cold front coming in from
Extremely
the
unusual,
west.
yes.
one of
uh-huh.
actually, in 1937, I believe, there was a terrible hurricane that hit New York and the whole Northeast. So it has happened before,
yeah.
but it doesn't happen very often. It's,
No,
it's
right.
not
Not to the-
so
yeah.
rare,
And not to the
that's
frequency
so far
and
in
the
the
extent they're
past that
happening
people,
now,
you know,
yeah.
people have forgotten
Yeah,
about it. But it was one of the most tremendous hurricanes in history
Yeah.
at the time, and it just ravaged the whole New York, New England, the whole Northeast coast. But
And weather
and
forecasting
they didn't
was
name
so
them.
primitive then that these people didn't know it until it was upon them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And also they didn't name them in those days. So one of the reasons we don't know it is because it doesn't have a name.
Doesn't
It wasn't
come-
Hurricane Sydney or Hurricane Anna or whatever. So they only began that, I think, after World War II, giving names to the
Yeah,
hurricanes.
in World War II, there's things that really had emphasis to weather forecasting because of aircraft and everything else. But yeah, this time they had high tide, the global warming
Oh, everything.
Everything was against
raised
them.
the
Yeah.
level.
You had the other cold front coming in.
Cold
from,
front
yeah,
coming in. You
yeah.
had a hurricane coming in from the east, and then you had the high tide because the moon was in the right position. So if you want to talk about the perfect
storm.
Mm-hmm.
that was it. And it showed it could happen, But
We're right back to the presidential election.
Well, there's an
How
awful
right
lot
you
of
are.
upset
what
right now, isn't there, with Rice and the bombing and so on and so forth. And
Did anybody watch Saturday Night Live this last Saturday?
No.
Well, everything was Petraeus,
oh yeah.
and it was it was very very.
well, what
good.
was sad today on the news, and from a different word of idea of what's sad is, I guess the who's this governor, or is he? Yeah, Governor Chris.
Oh, Chris
Christie
Christie of New
Chris
Jersey.
Christie
He was on
went
the Saturday
on,
Night
yeah,
Live.
and was joking about the tragedy.
No, I don't know. He joked about himself.
Himself.
I don't know if he.
Okay, well,
I
and
doubt he.
that
I don't think it
seemed
would
to
have
be
been.
the controversy.
No, I saw it, and
He joked about
It was-
himself.
Joked
they're
He joked
taking
about
it
that.
out of
He joked about
context.
that
and
windbreaker
he joked
jacket
about
he's been
his
wearing.
hostess.
Okay.
You know, the Twinkies and
Yeah,
that.
and I just thought,
no,
well,
no.
how could he have done that?
No,
you know?
He didn't joke about that, but he was talking about his windbreaker was wet, and it got so ranked because of the fact that it didn't clean or dry it for 3 weeks, stuff like that.
Every time you see him on TV, he's got that windbreaker jacket on, and I guess people are starting to say that's his entire wardrobe. You know?
Okay, so
I don't think he kissed
I'm
up enough
glad
to.
to hear it differently.
I don't think he kissed up enough to the president. Do you?
Whatever. Give you
I mean,
that.
okay, I can understand, folks. This is a tragedy. It's a natural tragedy. We have to put all this aside. The president is doing everything he can. We're local. We're doing what we can to coordinate our efforts. But you don't. I don't know. Of course, someone said he's standing election next year in a Democratic state. That could have something to do with his behavior. So.
How can you say that?
Do you
How
think
can you say that?
do
I
you
just
think
did.
they'll solve the fiscal cliff and
Watch the stock market.
I would
Well,
worry
it's
too
up
much.
100
stock
points
market.
this morning, but
Yeah.
what the fiscal cliff though is, Obama said, "I'm willing to compromise as long as it's my way."
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I wouldn't worry too much about it because if you've been following any of the things about the Mayan calendar, the world's supposed to end December 21st anyway. So
Oh, I'm going to get a new car then.
yeah, so don't worry about it. Yeah.
Can I? Let me just say a word about
Did you
that.
change that calendar, John?
Every time, one of the
how
great.
many have we had, huh?
Yeah.
One of the great myths of American politics and American public life is that we really want the politicians in Washington to compromise. If you take a poll, you get huge number. Yeah, we want them all to work together and compromise. It's not true. Because what most people mean when they say they want them to compromise is we want them to do it our way.
Sure.
We want the other guy to compromise. We want him to cave in and do it our way. That, in fact, is what most people mean by a compromise. They don't mean they want their side to compromise.
Oh,
No. We want what we want. But we want the other side to give in and do
To
it
agree with
our
us.
way.
Yeah.
Well, it's a give and take, and it's before.
It should be.
You give, I take.
Yeah. You
the
give and
trouble
I'll
is-
take, yeah.
The trouble is the parties are so extreme. One's the extreme left, the other one's the extreme right, and they don't want to meet.
Well, I take issue with the extreme right. Is anybody that's conservative is extreme right according to our news people.
Well,
Hey,
the
anybody-
news people are extreme left.
No, I'm talking. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we know.
Hostess company found that
Before we
out.
go any further, yeah, that's probably when the country's collapsing. When you can't buy a Twinkie in America, there's something wrong here.
Well, there's a website now that wants the government to nationalize Hostess. They want to
Really?
bail out. There's like 86,000 people have signed. They want
Oh.
the government to nationalize Hostess, bail them
We
out,
stick together.
and make it a federal company so that we can have our Twinkies and
We couldn't
Hostess.
do that. There's too much
So
sugar.
We need those like
Too many calories.
other-
And I'm nobody's
listen.
talking about the cupcake.
With
Everybody's
this-
talking about the
The Twinkie.
Twinkie.
Just
Nobody's
the
talking
Twinkie.
about the chocolate cupcake.
It takes
I-
a
How about
lot
Ho-Hos?
of
I was a
products,
chocolate
doesn't it?
cupcake.
With this administration, I think that's coming.
Before we go any further,
They
starting
will
here,
fight for Twinkie, huh?
starting here with Al Opitz and coming around the table in a clockwise fashion, doing this on purpose, we're going to introduce ourselves so people know these golden tone voices, who they
Okay.
belong to. Al,
Golden Tone.
and tell about yourself a little bit.
All right, my name's Al Opitz. I'm president of the Austin Urban Community Council. I'm also a student of Ken Little, who's missing today because of physical problems.
Okay, right here. Now, that would bring it to me, Jack Ryan, your MC, and the star of the show. And next we have a attorney,
Yeah, return. I was. It's been a few months since I've been on here. Yeah.
half a year maybe. Or
It's
something.
been a while. Yeah, my name is Bob Trazik, and I do a show on my own on Monday nights called Paranormal Radioactivity. So this is a little out of my league, although I do a lot with the
Okay,
presidents.
well,
Yeah.
where do you do this?
I do mine at WARG Radio, 88.9 FM, WARG. And also, too, you can streamline us on the air. And I'll be doing a show tonight, too.
It's on WARG.com?
Yeah,
or something?
WARG, right, .com.
Okay.
You can get us, yeah. And I do my show there, and it's all about hauntings, history, which you can't do one without the other. In another week, not this week, but next week, I'll be doing a lecture on the haunted White House and White House history at the Bridgeview Library. I'll be there for 2 hours talking about that, and I brought you some stuff that I'm going to use in my presentation next week. Some voices of the presidents from the past on old recordings that they at one time sold.
Did you bring President Dewey with you?
No, he was never president. No.
Okay, what
no.
time again?
Oh, I go on at 9 o'clock in the evening, yeah. And also, too, and before that, we do a fun thing, too. I started doing You Bet Your Life, the old radio quiz show. So we go on at 8 o'clock with that. We do You Bet Your Life. And then 9 o'clock, I do Paranormal Radio. And also, too, I was just talking to Mr. John Davila here, and I'm going to start doing a show with you good folks here.
Davila.
Oh, nice.
Davila? What is his name?
Davila.
Davila. I said, what did I say? Davila? Davita? He'll come out. And
What's your name, John? Give it to him.
Mr. John David. I'm going to start doing a show here on Chicago Paranormal.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Right. You ever get together with Ursula Bilski, or is she?
I know Ursula Bilski. I've met her. I know I can say that much. I met her, but I've never partnered up with her at anything.
She's sort of a strange character.
Well, you got to be in this business, you know.
Not like her.
Let's see. You got paratroopers, paramedics, paranormal.
Yeah.
What actually do? Oh, there's a question
What's the
for you.
difference?
What do you mean? What does paranormal mean? Really, you know, I have a rough idea, but
Out of the normal. Study of out of the normal.
I mean, like
Things of out of the normal. Supernatural, ghosts, hauntings, ghost sightings.
same as a cult or something like that.
Well, not necessarily a
Kind
cult.
of unbelievable.
Everybody, usually when I
Unexplained?
start off a lecture, when I'm doing a lecture, when I'm talking with people, I usually start it off with, who here has had an experience with the paranormal? And some people will raise their hands reluctantly, and then eventually I say, well, everybody here has had an experience with it, because they all have. Everybody at one time or another has experienced that, voice you've heard, or you smelled somebody's cigarette or cologne that wasn't there, or you've had that creepy feeling someone was watching you, or you've actually maybe seen something yourself. So we were talking a little bit about that earlier. I was talking about one of your other panelists here. We were talking about that. So, yeah, it's around us. It's all over. Some people are just a little more in tune with it than others, yeah.
The unexplained, like
Yeah,
that one?
unexplained,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That happens to me every day.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Everybody, yeah.
Next up,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Hi.
Next, sir.
Bill Kugelman. I'm president of the Fire Museum of Greater Chicago and a retired Chicago fireman. And we are in some tough times right now.
Yes.
Very tough times.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable tough times.
Tough times
yes.
for the museum, or
Well, tough times for the departments.
for the fire department?
Fire department, police department, city employees, government employees. They had better solve this pension problem that we have in not only in this city but in this state, in this country. It's been a rob Peter to pay Paul for too many years, and now it's caught up to them, and they better do something about it, because they will not get any decent people to fill these jobs once they are vacant. The fire department this month will pension off 364, and the police department, I think it's close to 600, John, 586. And there's no hiring in the immediate future.
And
Yeah.
we need that stability.
And the
we need that
well,
stability.
and it's yes, and that's what brings us to civility in the system. Are your police and fire, those public service employees, Jeanette? It's God, I hate to see what our kids are going to go through, and grandkids.
And you get people like our superintendent of police testifying before the council that we have plenty of police or whatever. And of course, let's remember something, folks. In a position like his, he's a paid mouthpiece more than anything. He doesn't have an opinion of his own. Like you'll ask most anyone who's a superintendent or commissioner, or what do you want to call him, big city chief of police, and they'll talk about how the citizenry should not be armed. It's all for the police. Well, that's nonsense. He doesn't believe that himself, because everyone should be able to defend themselves. Everyone should have a right to bear arms, as we do, and to be able to defend yourself. I mean, the good citizens don't have the weapons, just the bad guys.
And we are the only state in the union that has that rule. We are now the only state out of 50 that does not permit law-abiding citizens to be able to carry a firearm.
And you are who? Your next one up.
This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News Election Central. That's the way it is. Tuesday, November 19th, 2012, in New York. This is Walter Cronkite saying good night. I'm John Escacholco, and I am glad to be here on Meet the Chicago Historians with my many good and fine colleagues for another program discussing the American presidency.
Let's hear a little of your background there, mister.
A little bit of my background.
Yeah, what'd you do before?
Well, I was in politics for many years. I served in the Illinois General Assembly for a term. I was a town trustee and assessor in the town of Cicero.
We forgive you for all of that, John.
And I'm sure I'm the only person here, as I mentioned at the last show, who was once a member of the Electoral College. I was part of the Electoral College in 1988, which, as it happens, was the last time that Illinois voted Republican, last time that a Republican could have been an elector from the state of Illinois.
The Electoral College?
Yes.
Did you go there on a football scholarship? Or?
No, I was there for the big game, though. I was there for a big game. I had a megaphone and a raccoon coat and everything, and the school team and all of that. So it's very good to be with you as we...
Look out for the old flying wedge.
Yeah, that's right.
Wedge or wedgie?
Next up, sir, who are we?
I'm Rich Lang, your announcer, and also a student of Ken Little's Chicago history class.
And Ken isn't able to hear today. And you also, were you also a member of the academia yourself?
I did some teaching at the college level, American and European history, way back long
Where was
ago.
this at?
Pardon?
Where was this?
Nebraska.
Nebraska.
In the late 70s.
Cornhuskers, huh?
Yeah, right.
I beat you. I left that place in 1960.
Ooh. And we are missing some people. And
Yes, we are.
Well, we should mention a couple of... just a minute. We're going to... don't worry. We know. We got the girl. We want the pink booties over here. She's waiting one moment in the wings. And our brother Vic Reaney has been at home recuperating from back surgery. And of course, I guess he tunes us in on the other. And someone else was supposed to mention. Who else you say? Ken is off. Tom McKenna couldn't make it today, who's joined our group recently, my good friend. And as far as I haven't heard anything more about Brother Vic Justino, another one of our charter members,
Alumni.
who has alumnus, who was supposed to get a real job on radio coming up, but nothing's come yet. I heard of it anyway. I'm going to give him a call. He's a hard guy to get a hold of.
Yes, he is.
And if you get a hold of him, hang on to him. Next up, and last but not least, we have our Champagne lady, the lovely Jeanette de Frontier. And let's hear from you.
Hello, and my name is Jeanette Frontier, and I'm a graduate of WJJG Radio, and I'm surrounded by a marvelous panel here that exceeds my brain wave, and I hope you enjoy our show today.
Remember what Ken Little said last time. Not only you proved that we have brains and beauty and some males too.
Thank you, Jack.
So anyway, before we get on to something else, one more thing to mention. We usually like to talk about museums and whatever is around now, but today we have to mention that the movie Lincoln came out Friday. Did anyone see that yet?
Not yet. No. Did you, Jack?
We actually went and saw it. I
Did
couldn't
you?
believe
Oh.
it. My wife actually went out, and I myself went out Thursday, and we saw they've got this Fathom Enterprises that show special pictures now and then. Like last month it was Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. Well, this month it was To Kill a Mockingbird. It went down to the new theaters on Icon Theaters on Roosevelt, right near Clark, and it's a national hookup in conjunction with Turner Classic Movies. Turner Classic Movies. Anyway, so the next day she said, "Want to go see Lincoln?" I said, "Yeah, you better believe it." So I had it seemed like a weekly appointment with some doctor or other, and we went right from there to the first showing, and it's very interesting. It covers like the last 3 months of Lincoln's life and the last 3 months of the Civil War and into peace, and it's very well. It's like such a thorough job of going down to every little detail. Remember, Bob? What did they do?
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier because I didn't know Jack for a long time. We're coffee buddies in the morning, and we were talking about Lincoln. I haven't seen the film yet myself, but they actually used the sounds of the ticking clock that once was in Lincoln's law office. They taped the sounds, and they used that for his clock. Mary Todd's Lincoln's music box, and a chime, like a dinner chime that they had used in the White House at that time. So actually, like, who's going to know that these things are the chimes or the clock? But they actually wanted this much authenticity in it. they actually use these things.
Jack, is it a revisionist portrayal? Are they trying to make some political point? Because when Spielberg is involved in it, I'm a little skeptical.
I don't think so.
Is there
really,
an axe to grind
what they're trying to do is since we have to be so much filled in fictionally anyway, but they're showing what a down to earth regular guy he really was, and how a brilliant man he was at the same time. For example, just before the final surrender, before he's meeting with Grant, and they're sitting on the porch. He said, "Well, you know what I said. Treat everybody like nothing happened, and let them keep their sidearm. Let them go home with their horse." And he said, "I wouldn't mind it if you let Jeff Davis and the rest of the boys escape either for the country." Just like that, just like putting it like two guys would just having a conversation, and that's pretty much what they do. And what they do, they show what a great range of abilities that the man had, and how multifaceted he really was. And they don't show the assassination itself. They show the son is at some kids' play, and you get the word of it. So, and they have a really interesting cast. David Strathairn, that one actor, he portrays Seward. And what's the I think Giamatti's name?
Paul Giamatti?
Paul.
The one that was John Adams and
he's I can't think which one he is. He might be who's is it Stanton? Who was the
that
treasurer?
film's got a very, very good supporting cast. Tommy Lee Jones, you got a lot of good actors.
Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones is
Sally Field, of course, plays Mary
Tommy
Todd.
Lee Jones is the radical Republican from Pennsylvania. What's his name?
Sumner.
Thaddeus.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. Yeah, I haven't seen the film, so I don't know.
Thaddeus Stevens.
Stevens,
Thad
that's right.
Stevens.
Yeah, that's who he is.
Yeah.
And
Who portrays Grant?
I'm not sure who he is.
No one well known.
Who that guy is.
What I heard on an interview was in respect to this film, is it wanted to be so authentic that we would not realize it, but that Lincoln himself had a very high-pitched voice.
Yeah.
And you probably all know that.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
And I
was kinda
guess
like
they
this,
kept that.
Thanks, Musketeers. No.
I believe they tried to portray that, or
Yeah, well,
Yes, they did.
we don't really know, although there is some speculation. They say that the phonograph was actually invented, and they did have an experimental recording of Lincoln's voice, although it doesn't exist. There was just an article in the paper last week on the oldest known sound recording they have. It's from 1878. It was a tinfoil recording. And it's of a cornet solo and someone reciting Old Mother Hubbard, and they said it's also the first recorded blooper because whoever was recording it messed up the little Old Mother Hubbard, and he started laughing that he made a mistake and corrected himself. So we may have a recording, but I don't know if the phonograph didn't go back that far. It was 1877,
Right.
so we really don't know what he sounded like.
Right.
And even at that, on an early recording, it would have been kind of hard to,
When I portray Lincoln, I do a voice kind of like this, which is as best as I can understand is what we think Lincoln sounded a little bit like. Had a kind of a squeak to it, and he spoke a little bit like this. And you might be interested to know that it was on this date, 149 years ago, that I delivered the great address at the Gettysburg at the dedication of the cemetery. So what you call the Gettysburg Address was delivered on this date, the 19th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1863.
They're having some kind of a deal down there today. Special Spielberg is there, and
for all accounts of people that actually knew him and heard him, Lincoln's voice was sort of a mixture. Of course, now he was a backwoods person, uneducated, formally, so to speak.
And we were the West. I mean, he was a Westerner.
So he was.
West.
So it's like a mixture of like a Southern and a Midwestern drawl to it too. And they also think he may have had some sort of a speech impediment too, because his one son did. The one son, Tad, had a little bit of a speech impediment.
he was a Kentuckian.
Yeah. Yeah.
well,
Don't forget, he also had he speculated what he had. It was Marfan's.
Yeah.
And that
He could,
may have affected him too.
He can slam dunk a basketball too. And we have come now to our first.
We'll be right back to the discussion following this short intermission.
I'm gonna go.
How are the tires on your vehicle? Do you need motor oil? Do you need transmission fluid or power steering fluid or antifreeze? Now that the weather's getting cold, you got to make sure that you have good antifreeze in your radiator. How about the wiper blades? Are they in good, sharp condition for the snowy, icy weather that's coming upon us? Is the washer fluid in your tank filled? How good is your battery? Do you need to replace light bulbs? Well, the place to pick all these items up is at Berkeley Auto Supply at 5237 St. Charles Road in Berkeley. Stop in and see Tom, and he will help you get any part or supply you might need for your vehicle. Tom at Berkeley Auto Supply has everything you need for your vehicle. He has every tool, part, supply you might need from the top of your roof to the bottom of the chassis and from front bumper to rear bumper. You can call Tom at 708-544-8350. And they are located at 5237 St. Charles Road in Berkeley. Tom's hours are Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. He's open on Saturdays from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening. And he's even open on Sunday from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock. That's Berkeley Auto Supply, 5237 St. Charles Road, just east of Wolf Road and west of Mannheim Road, about 2 miles on the south side of the street. Call 708-544-8350. For parts, tools, and supply, it's Berkeley Auto Supply. Once again, 708-544-8350 or 5237 St. Charles Road in Berkeley, Illinois.
Now, back to Meet the Chicago Historians. Jack?
What? We back? We back, folks?
We're back.
We're back.
Speaking of high voices, I understand George Patton had a high-pitched voice, too.
I heard this, yeah.
He did not sound like George C. Scott.
No.
Him, we probably have recordings of. We probably know what his voice sounded like.
Of course, the voice that George C. Scott gave him comes more like an attitude portrayed. Family loved the picture, by the way. They did, his own family. So...
And Patton had a little problem because he always thought he was back in the Roman times, and he's. I remember when I was here, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, he thought he was had lived many lives and all that business. Yeah. My dad hadn't gone to see a movie in I don't know how many years, and he went out with my one brother to see it. A few days later, he went with the other brother, same week. So, but that was his war. He was in the Navy and that, but it was still his war. So, and of course that's 1970 already. Saw George C. Scott on a rerun of Naked City last night.
No man ever won a war by dying for his country.
Yeah.
He won it by making the other poor so-and-so die for his.
My brother was there with my mother. He had to tell her what fornicating was. He said in the speech. He had to tell his own mother.
Okay.
So anyway, well, that's about it right now. Now we can get into. We have some special recordings. No, wait a minute. Did you have some report first? A Champagne lady? That's why I made
Jack,
the last.
I thought as we got in depth with the presidential do's and don'ts and what we expected and so on and so forth about it, I have some slogans that each president used. And
let's hear them.
If you're wanting, I will read it to you right now. We're talking about campaign slogans. The current presidential candidates' slogans are rather tame. Forward for Barack Obama and Believe in America for Mitt Romney. But this was not so with some of our other candidates. When Democrats sought to get Franklin Pierce elected president, they reminded voters of James Polk when 8 years earlier, the slogan, "We poked you in 1844, will pierce you in 1852. The next one that I'd like to talk about is, this was a saying, sunflowers die in November. Doesn't seem like a winning slogan in a presidential race, but it was Franklin Roosevelt's campaign, and he was referring to the 1936 opponent Alf Landon, whose home state of Kansas, and its official flower, which was featured on Landon's campaign buttons. And that's how sunflowers die in November. Candidates usually try to reassure the voters, but in 1997, how would we be saying that? Rebel leader Charles Taylor intimidated them instead, suggesting that a civil war might be reignited if he was not elected president. Taylor's slogan, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." He won the election, but was later arrested and convicted of war crimes. The 1884 U.S. election was by all accounts nasty. The Democratic candidate, New York Governor Grover Cleveland, was considered an honest man who wasn't afraid to stand up to special interests. But it also came out in the campaign that he had an affair years earlier and that he was financially supporting the woman and his illegitimate son. The Republicans enjoyed yelling, "Mama, where's my pa?" But the Democrats got the last laugh after Cleveland won with the rejoinder, "Gone to the White House, ha ha."
So was the baby a mistake by the lake?
Cleveland, by the way, he always
He
denied.
never told me.
Cleveland always denied that he had actually been the father, but he said that this woman had known a number of gentlemen at the time, but he was the only one that supported that supported.
Gee whiz, doesn't that sound like it just happened?
We're very updated,
Well,
aren't we?
in spite of his scandal, if you want to call it that, he still managed to get himself elected twice to the presidency, the 23rd president and the 24th. Yeah, so twice.
No.
terms.
He was the one that was in between.
Yeah.
So he like the 23rd and the 25th or something.
That sounds
Harrison served in the middle, and then
Yeah.
he ran
He won
again
the
and won.
popular vote
Yeah.
3 times,
Yeah.
but he lost in the electoral college the middle.
Yeah.
That's how Benjamin Harrison became president. But Cleveland did carry the popular vote in that election.
He was also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, our first president to be married in the White House.
Right.
Yeah, first president married
Francis
Folsom Cleveland, very young, much younger than he was.
49 and she
Yeah.
was in her 20s, I
Yeah.
think, when they married.
Some unglamorous Illinois politicians have tried to turn that deficit into an advantage. Governor Richard Ogilvie used the slogan, "Charisma isn't everything," but the voters,
Understandably.
but the voters were more charmed by Dan Walker in 1972. The grandmotherly-looking Dawn Clark Netsch described herself as more than just a pretty face, but she was less than a match for incumbent Governor Jim Edgar in 1994. When ethically challenged, Edwards ran against the former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke for Louisiana governor in 1991. The bumper stickers included "Vote for the Crook," "It's important," and "Vote for the Lizard, not the Wizard." And the Lizard won. The second spot on the ticket rarely gets much respect, but Grover Cleveland's running mate, former Indiana Governor Thomas Hendricks, surely had reason to complain when a sloganeer penned, "We'll shout for our man and his important appendix. We'll whoop her up lively for Cleveland and Hendricks." Some slogans sound like they were doomed from the start. In 1952, Adlai Stevenson, facing World War II hero General Dwight Eisenhower, went into battle with the jarring, passive-aggressive "You never had it so good." And in 1968, Democrats for Humphrey asked, "Who but Hubert?" It's a good thing for politicians that campaign slogans have an expiration date. Woodrow Wilson's 1960 claim, "He kept us out of war," lasted only until April 6th of 1917. Barack Obama was the Hope and Change candidate in 2008, reflecting the optimistic American view that change is good. But in 1900, President William McKinley won re-election with the opposite slogan, "Let well enough alone." And that's my conclusion of some of the campaign slogans that probably just go over our head.
Very good.
But they
Yeah.
all have a moment.
Thank you.
There was the old one,
Yeah.
Tippecanoe and
When
Tyler,
one comes
too.
to,
And keep cool with Coolidge.
Yeah.
And
How
I
about,
like Ike.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like Ike.
I've got, I still have somewhere a corncob pipe from MacArthur, from
Right
the
with
Republic
the-
Convention, and the straw hat.
with a corncob pipe and a button nose and two eyes made out of coal.
It's coming now. Let's not start.
One I liked was, of course, wasn't very successful, but in '64 it was Barry Goldwater from Arizona and William Miller, congressman from New York, and it was, "In your heart you know he's right," to which the posters would be around, and they designed a very similar printing they put underneath it that said, "Yes, of the extreme right." Remember that?
Yeah.
They put those underneath it, like tape it on there or paste it right into them.
Well, the other one that was always dump the hump
Yeah.
with Humphrey, yeah.
We actually inadvertently, John DeVita, our host and general manager, used a campaign slogan when before we went on the air. He said, "Now let's keep the ball rolling." That was actually a slogan that was used in the 1840 campaign by William Henry Harrison, which also gave us the most famous campaign slogan of all time, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. But the secondary slogan they had was, "Let's keep the ball rolling," because his supporters would construct enormous balls out of paper and roll them from one town to the other, and they would be inscribed with Harrison's name and the running man, Tippecanoe and Tyler, and all their slogans. And they would roll these balls with crowds of supporters from one town to the next. And I guess in the small towns of backwoods America in 1840, it was a big deal when a bunch of guys came into town rolling a big paper ball through the main street. So that became one of their slogans: "Let's keep the ball rolling."
Unfortunately for Harrison, he didn't get much of a chance to keep the ball rolling because he died in just 1 month.
Short
1 month he died in office.
He
Yeah.
delivered the longest inaugural address
Yeah.
of all time, without a hat and without a top coat, in freezing weather and drizzle coming down, caught pneumonia and died 1 month later.
Yeah, and then the next man that came in was the first time they actually used the vice president becoming president on a president's death. It was the first time that was used, and that was John Tyler.
They called
Tyler,
it his accidency.
Yeah, and Tyler had to actually fight for it because they wanted to hold another election. He says, "No, by right, I am the president." John Tyler was an interesting man. He had the largest presidential family. He had 14 children from 2 marriages, 7 with the first Mrs. Tyler, 7 with the second Mrs. Tyler. And one of his daughters, now John Tyler was born in 1799 when Washington was president. His daughter, Pearl Tyler Ellis, lived until 1947, middle of the 20th century, and he actually has 2 grandsons that are alive today, that are in their 80s.
Whoa.
Yeah. So John Tyler, for having the large family, it did him well, because a lot of his ancestors are still around.
Where was he from originally?
He's a
Tyler?
Confederate. He remained a staunch Confederate all through the Civil War.
Right, I thought so.
The daughter, Pearl Tyler, the one that I just said died in 1947, was born in 1860, right at the start of the Civil War when he was in his 70s. And I think he died when she was like 2 years old, so she didn't really remember
He was
her father.
elected to the so-called Confederate Congress, but he died before he could take his seat in the
Ken Little's absent today, but he could tell you. I think it was Congress Street. Was that Tyler Street at one time on there?
I
believe so.
Could have been, yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Well, they still got a Tyler Street over there.
Yeah, but
Tyler Street and
it was changed
West
because
side.
Tyler turned to Confederacy and
He didn't turn to Confederacy. He remained a Confederate.
He was a Virginian. He was a Virginian. In fact, he was put on the ticket because the Whigs were essentially a northern party, and Harrison was a northerner, although Harrison had been born in Virginia as well, but he was associated with Ohio. He had been in Ohio politics, and they wanted a southerner to balance the ticket. So they put Tyler, who had been a Democrat most of his career, just for the usual reason, to attract votes, not knowing that Harrison was going to die 1 month into his administration, and then the Whigs are stuck with essentially a Democratic president for the 4 years when they finally had been able to elect a man to the White House.
That's
and
why
he's gone in a short time.
You have to be a little careful with some of the people we pick as vice president because
But
you
he-
never know what's going to happen.
that happened with Lincoln too. 'Cause,
It happened with Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. They pushed him in to vice president to get him out of New York.
Took him upstairs.
They wanted him out of New
Dreaming to
York.
become
And then on
president.
McKinley's death, he became the president. Yeah.
Bully,
good
bully.
president, but you look at Lincoln Johnson took over, he was one of the worst presidents.
Oh, horrible! Yeah, he was not a very well liked man. No,
Can
Johnson
you
was
imagine
not.
what would happen
Yeah.
now if something happened to Obama? Who we'd be stuck with?
Well, didn't the same
Big mouth?
thing happen
Oh.
to Truman?
In a sense,
Wasn't there? I mean, he was not a liked person.
not at
Well, he was
first.
Truman was well liked.
Like
Yeah.
an unknown.
But he wasn't. He was considered
Or
a lightweight.
classy,
He was
yeah.
not considered to
Something-
be. You know, he was looked upon
High
as.
class.
He had come
was a
out of
farm
he had
boy.
come out of the Pendergast machine in Kansas City,
And
and he
after-
was looked upon
Uh-huh.
as a small time politician.
Right.
Yeah, and after
Right.
12 years of
Right.
Roosevelt, it was like a hard act to follow.
Uh-huh.
So it would have been tough for anybody, really, to anybody.
But
When
I
you look
mean,
back
I
on
thought,
it all-
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
thought he ended up being a pretty
Respectable.
good. Yes.
Oh,
He
yeah.
is looked upon as a
That's
great.
why I
But
was
at the time,
surprised to hear.
at the time, he was just sort of he was an acceptable candidate. He was someone they had to get rid of Roosevelt's running mate from the third term because he was just so far to the left.
Henry
that-
Wallace.
Yeah,
Wallace.
everyone
Wallace,
loves
uh-huh.
Wallace.
And
Friendly Henry
what was
Wallace.
Truman's big thing is the buck stops here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. He was the boss,
He,
and he
yeah,
took it.
he did show
That's what it's
his
supposed to be, isn't
authority,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
and he always defended his personal family.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Because I know his wife even got bullied, and
Well,
his
Bess
daughter
kind of-
got
The kids-
critiqued.
the
Yeah,
kids
Bess,
did
Bess
too.
kind of
Yeah.
did not like the White House. Some of our first families, some of our first ladies and first families have loved the White House. Bess was
No,
one
she
who did
was
not.
not,
She was not thrilled about living in it. And fortunately for her, they only lived in the White House actually half of his term because when Truman was in office, the White House was going to collapse.
Right.
And fortunately for us, he was in there when he was because they were actually going to tear the White House down. It was in such bad repair.
Didn't they
And
go to
Truman-
live in Blair House?
They lived in Blair House for most of their
That's
term.
where the
Right.
assassination attempt
Right,
was.
yeah.
The White House to the walls, but
Right.
they kept the facade so that the
And
building would
yeah, they
remain
kept
the
it-
same and completely rebuilt.
Well, they
the
had to
And,
rebuild the
Okay.
foundation.
Oh,
too,
right
for
from the
those
ground up,
thinking,
it was
yeah.
all steel pinnings and everything. It was going to collapse. There was that famous story of one of Margaret Truman's pianos coming through the second floor ceiling, coming
Yeah.
down. White House was in bad shape.
Well,
over
I-
the years, from so many remodelings and not having steel underpinnings, it being built with wood timbers and stuff, and the haste in which it was rebuilt after the War of 1812, when it was burned, and over the years, so many remodelings cutting into it and piping put in and plumbing putting in and all these things it was not meant to hold. It was the whole building was actually going to collapse.
I
But
have-
fortunately, Truman had a real strong sense of history, and he really
Loved
pushed
history.
for the house being kept there and rebuilt. They raised a lot of money for the rebuilding of the White House from charred timbers that they found when they stripped everything away that were leftovers from when the house was burnt.
Right.
And they made them into walking sticks and wooden bowls, and they sold those artifacts. Once in a while, they turn up around in antique shops. Yeah, they call them hauntiques because anything that kind of comes out of the White House has a
Yeah.
little bit of a curse to it. So
Now, who was
Yeah.
when he did run when he did run in '48? Who was his running mate? I don't.
Truman's?
Barkley.
Yeah.
No, Sparkman. No, wait.
Wasn't Barkley?
No, Sparkman
No.
was
Sparkman was
52.
Stevenson. It was Alvin Barkley.
Barkley.
Barkley,
Alvin
Yeah.
Barkley.
I thought he was. Oh, you're right. Yeah, I realized.
Vice,
You're right.
Vice President
Alvin
tend to get
Barkley,
forgotten.
Vice
Um,
President until he.
Yeah,
That
Senator from
real,
Kentucky.
bushy eyebrows. Isn't
Alvin
that-
Barkley,
wasn't
yeah,
that his,
yeah.
yeah.
the problem that Truman had, though, was Roosevelt kept him in the dark. When Roosevelt died, Truman had no idea what was going on.
Well, he had only been. I mean, he'd
From the
only been
A-bomb to-
vice president for a few months. So I mean, and FDR did not know or believe, and his doctors did not tell him that he was going to die. So Roosevelt,
Never
right up to
talked
the
to
day
him
he
about
died,
anything.
Roosevelt was planning for what he was going to do after his term of office had ended. So people, it may have been that Roosevelt felt he had 4 years to discuss these things with Harry, and had no idea that he was going to be gone in
His,
that short of a time.
towards the end of Roosevelt's term, though, his illnesses and stuff were starting to be seen.
By
up
others.
up
But
until that.
he never accepted.
Yeah, up until that
and
time,
his
he never-
doctors did not tell him.
He
He
looked
never allowed
very
himself
bad
to be
at the
seen in
end
a
of the
wheelchair. He never allowed himself to be seen with crutches, and then towards the
Never.
end he did because it was
Yeah.
just it was apparent that he was failing. You know,
The
yeah.
final
That was
final
Tim Moore
inauguration
was
Yeah.
Yeah.
was done at
But
the White House.
Truman
They
came
did
in, and
not
Truman
go down
held
to
his
the
ground.
Capitol
You know,
building for the final
he held it, and
inauguration.
like you said, he came under a lot of criticism himself. But what he could not stand was criticism of his wife or daughter.
That's right.
Unfortunately,
Or his little dog fell.
And
Yeah.
that comes right down to the present time too.
He's
Yeah,
suppo-
yeah.
supposedly he was a very plain talking guy, and he got to these different conferences, and he asked Molotov, "What's this supposed to be all about?" Or he would
Yeah.
instead of just soft soaping it
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
not
got
being
to
very
the point.
diplomatic. Molotov.
And he
the,
he could be foul mouthed too.
Oh, if he wanted
among his
to,
staff,
yeah, he was known. He was
very-
a no nonsense. They called him, give him hell, Harry.
Right.
Yeah, he was a tough little guy when he
Uh-huh.
needed to be. Yeah.
But you know
the first class in diplomacy is how to lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was interviewed once for that office in that department, anyway, and I no memory, so I was sort of eliminated. But they told me the first thing was learn how to lie.
Yeah.
Well, with Truman, I
That's
believe
politics 101.
Yeah, he actually had health problems from splitting himself in two. He didn't believe in payoffs or
No.
graft and that.
Yeah.
And
He
he
was
found
an
out that that's how some of the things work.
He was part of the most corrupt political machine in
I
the
can't
country,
believe that
but
one.
he was
He didn't know.
but he was personally honest. And that was one of the reasons that they selected him for the Senate. They needed a clean candidate from the Democratic organization
That's been
in
the
Missouri
downfall of,
to become the senator. So he was elected to the Senate. When he got to the Senate, no one wanted to have anything to do with Truman because they thought he was a corrupt politician because of his origin. It took a while for them to realize that no, Harry was an honest politician, and then he developed respect as time went on. And by the time he was selected, he was one of the most respected men in Washington. But he wasn't well known. The rest of the country, hardly anyone had heard of Harry Truman.
Well,
That was-
Pendergast was not happy with Truman either, because he turned his back on Pendergast. What I understand.
No, not really. You know, when
sure about
Pendergast died, he went to his funeral, and there was a lot of criticism of that. And Truman said, no, you know, that this man was my benefactor, and I'm not going to.
Was he president then, by that time?
Yeah, I think he was president.
I don't think MacArthur was too fond of him either.
Well, that's another.
Charlie McCarthy?
Yeah. No, MacArthur.
Oh.
General MacArthur.
Yeah, he said
Yeah.
the generals ain't worth a bucket of spit or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Or was that the vice
Yeah.
president?
Well, he was
Unfortunately, that's been the downfall of
he was a
many
private.
of a few. More than one president was the president himself was a very honest, very straight-laced man, but he was surrounded by a very corrupt cabinet. General Grant had
Sounds
that
like
problem.
Grant in the-
Grant
City
served.
Hall.
Warren G. Harding served a
Harding
very
was
corrupt.
personally honest,
Yeah,
but he had
a very, very corrupt administration.
Here we
Yeah,
are
yeah.
back to the present day.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing changes
Lyndon
much. does it?
Johnson.
Well, there was three presidents that never had a relationship with outside of marriage, and that one was Truman.
Buchanan.
No.
Yeah.
Buchanan wasn't married.
He was never
No,
married.
but- yeah, I'm talking about I said outside the marriage.
Nixon.
Nixon was one,
Yeah.
and Truman.
Sure.
Truman, Carter.
Carter.
Like
Oh, he lusted after women, though. Did you know
Yeah,
that?
well, Carter had
Yeah.
no idea what he's
Welcome to
doing.
the club there, Jimmy.
Another interesting thing about Harry Truman is that Bess's wife, Bess's mother, Harry's mother-in-law, never thought that Harry was good enough for her
His
daughter
daughter.
Bess, up to and including when he became president of the United
Right.
States.
Are
She
there,
was still
are there
alive.
any
And
mother-in-laws that do that?
she still didn't think that Harry Truman was good enough for because they were of kind of the local aristocracy of that part of Missouri, and Harry's dad had been, as they say, a dirt farmer, and so she just never felt that he was socially acceptable.
Yeah. His
as-
caliber.
yeah.
My
Totally
mother-in-law,
Yeah.
my mother-in-law,
And made it very clear, and was telling. I think on election night, you know, when she was telling people, I never thought he was much of anything. I don't know how he became president. She's
And
telling this to the
ironically,
reporters, you know.
She voted
They
for
ended
Dewey.
up living with her their whole
Yeah,
Their
marriage.
home
What?
in-
yeah. That home that you
Ever.
see, that was Bess's
No,
home.
we paid for that.
Okay.
Yeah, in the White House, he actually had them both. He had his mother and he had his mother-in-law both living in the
Yeah,
White House.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Truman
yeah, he
owned
had them
his
both.
own
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
My
That's
mother,
what Obama
my
does
mother-in-law
right now.
used to introduce me as this is Barbara's husband. He's not Irish,
Oh.
but he's a nice guy.
He's a nice
He's
guy.
part Irish, isn't you?
Oh.
Is you part Irish? No? I don't know.
I can't tell you which part.
Well, let's say
I'm half a half. I'm going to be.
my wife's family's all Polish, and I was the first one who wasn't Polish.
Yeah.
I was the only one that was not
I went through
Catholic
that
too.
If you go to, we mentioned Blair House, where Harry lived during the time that the White House was being renovated. And if you go there, there is a bronze plaque on the wrought iron fence surrounding Blair House in memory of a man named Leslie Kofeld, who was a White House police officer. He was not a Secret Service agent. He was part of the White House Police, which was then a separate uniformed body distinct from the Secret Service. And, of course, you probably remember the story. There were so-called Puerto Rican nationalists.
Is it the same as the Capitol Police today, maybe?
It's similar to the Capitol
Yeah.
Police. It was a separate White House uniformed police because the Secret Service
Terry
were
Gaynor's
plain clothes.
Terry Gaynor's outfit.
And when they attempted to kill Harry Truman, they were going to crash through the front door of the Blair House, thinking that it was not as heavily guarded as was the White House. Harry Truman is on the second floor at this time, and there's an open window. and he hears a commotion going on downstairs. So he goes to the window to see what was happening, and the Secret Service agent grabbed him and literally yanked him away from the window, because these guys could have seen him up there.
Yes.
But they did kill one of the two officers who was there at the gate guarding them. They opened fire. The officers returned fire. Leslie Kofelt was killed.
He was one.
And so he was the only man ever to die in personal defense of the President of the United States. And the plaque commemorates that. The only man to ever give his life in defense of the President of the
Tim
United
McCarthy
States.
came close there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah.
Well, it's a funny story about Truman, though. I went to his house in Missouri and went to the Truman Library, and he's buried at the foot of the Truman Library.
Oh.
And he said he wanted to be buried there because he might want to get up to go to work.
That's interesting.
Yeah, once upon a time, security was very, very. A lot of people don't realize that today, but security at the White House was very, very lax at one time. Just about anybody could walk into the White House anytime they wanted to, at will, and go up and see the president.
Up until World War II, you
until
could
Clinton.
just walk into the White House. It was considered a public
That's right.
building.
Absolutely, yes.
So you could walk in, and
Yeah.
if you had no
Sure,
reason to be there, they would
Yeah.
ask you to leave. But
Bathroom, maybe?
there's a story. David Brinkley used to tell a story about a fellow in Washington in 1939, and a storm blew up, and he couldn't get the top up on his convertible, so he pulled into the rotunda of around the White House to get under the portico, and a couple of the staff came out and helped him to get the hood, to the top of his car up,
right.
because he was caught in the rain.
Who's
This happened in 1939.
Who was it?
It was just somebody. David Brinkley told the story.
someone,
David
okay.
Brinkley was a reporter at that time in Washington. But with World War II, that's when it changed. The White House then became like a military, because Roosevelt,
Yes,
commander-in-chief, they had uniformed military guarding the White House, and that's where we get our concept that the White House's security closed off. It began with Pearl Harbor, and then it never.
Well, that's
never
portrayed in
changed.
Yankee Doodle Dandy, remember?
I'm
He's
just
gonna walk
glad
in
you
the
meant
gate.
they show that where they
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
they have the
Oh,
guards
yeah.
with the
Yeah.
old World War
Yeah.
I style helmet there, standing guard at the White House. That's what changed, and after the war, it never reverted back.
Yeah,
to
the White
that.
House was a very open place at one time. Thomas Jefferson loved to answer the front door. Warren G. Harding loved to answer the front door. If someone knocked on the door, Warren G. Harding would come down, very often in his bathrobe, and he'd answer the door and let anybody in that wanted to come in and talk to the president. Calvin Coolidge was known to keep an open house, particularly after he lost his son. He said, if any young boy ever comes to the White House and asks to see the president, he's to be brought right in, no questions asked. Sometimes this has been to the president's downfall. And this happened once. There's a famous story during the administration of Theodore Roosevelt. When Roosevelt was president, now we're talking Theodore Roosevelt, a man showed up late in the evening in informal dress and asked to be admitted. He said he had an appointment with the president. So he was ushered in. He was seated in the blue room, I believe it was, and someone went to get the president and said, there's a gentleman here to see you. And he says, well, I'm not expecting anyone. I don't have any appointments. And he says, well, that's all right. I'll go down and see him. So he went down. He talked with the man for about 15 minutes, and he realized he had no connection with this man whatsoever. So he signaled for an usher to come over, and he told the usher, he says, get rid of this crackpot. Get him out of here. So he excused himself, left the room, and two ushers came and ushered the man out, on which point they found he had a concealed revolver in his coat, probably there with the intention of killing the president. During Hoover's administration, during a state dinner, a man was able to get into the White House and physically threaten the president, at which time, during Hoover's administration, the White House became like a prison, actually. It really did. Servants there had a real rough time, too. Whenever the president or first lady entered a room, they had to make themselves hidden. It became very different during the Hoover administration, because Hoover was obviously not a well-liked man.
He didn't
when was
give a
in
damn
office.
either, did he? Hoover?
Hoover was kind of a hard-nosed president. Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt, you talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
At that time, I don't believe the fence had not been erected around the White
No,
House
it was,
at that time.
you could walk on the lawn,
And
take pictures, whatever you wanted to
employees
do.
at the old State War and Navy building, which is now called the old Executive Office building, when they would be leaving work, they would cut across the White House lawn to get back to their homes, and often the president would be out, and we would say hello to people, and they would say hello to the president as they would be cutting across the White House lawn to get home.
You know, they had all those buildings around the White House, stables, and actually barns, and they were tearing them down. And Teddy Roosevelt was inundated with rats throughout the White House.
Oh, the White House had a
And
long
that's
history
where,
of rats. Yeah.
Well, that's where Teddy Roosevelt got all of his friends who had fox terriers,
Uh-huh.
and they called them rat terriers.
Yeah, rat terriers,
after
yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah.
And
What
that's
is the problems
that's
with
what
rats
that
forever?
dog
That's
of
the
mine
legend.
is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
This-
Googled
this is
that
a
up,
rat
and I
terrier.
never noticed
Yeah.
that. But those little rat
Interesting.
terrier, little dogs got rid of all those rats.
Yes,
Yeah.
they can't.
And they kept them around.
Got rats in the White House now?
Yes, two-legged, two-legged.
I had the nice enjoyment of being in the White House on a tour, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And about 2 weeks later, it was the incident on Pennsylvania Avenue where they were shooting and whatever, what was their idea about it. And that's when I think the last of the tours ended. Now, I don't know if they've reinstated that.
I think they have now
Yes.
since Bush left the office. I think
Okay.
they've reinstated the tours, but you have to write your representative or whatever to get
Request.
permission.
Okay, well,
and you go
this-
through like 3 of the rooms. You go like the
this
East
was
room,
a
the Blue
tr-
room, the Red room. You go
Uh-huh.
through like 3 of the public rooms, and that's about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we got
Yeah.
we got through many things, but when you mentioned they were what they do remodel and so
Oh yeah.
on,
Mhm.
I still was very surprised, even though I knew the age of the building, how run down it was. I mean, you could see the layers of paint and you know the you
It takes,
just see that it was
It takes 570
worn
gallons
out.
of paint to paint the outside of the White House.
2 coats?
Yeah.
It's
I
a
don't know if they do
beautiful
2 coats or
sight,
1. I don't know.
But inside it's old.
From
It's very
the
old.
time the White House was built until after the Civil War, when they talk about the Gilded Age, when you started having the great industrialists, for all that time, it was the largest residence in the United States. There was no private home in America
That
larger
large.
than the White House until about the 1870s, when some of the wealthy
Well, do you
industrialists
really
began
think that
building
that's a
bigger homes.
residence? You know,
Well, they
As long
do
as
live
it's
on the
open.
second
That's
floor.
what
Yeah,
we
it is.
consider
It's
that.
actually much
But
more-
it's not a
I
residence.
would call it
It's a
an office
business.
business.
It's much more of a
Yeah,
residence
that-
now than it was at one
Everyone-
time.
But it was
Yeah.
still the residence. I mean, it was a home of
Yeah.
the president.
We
Uh-huh.
just call it that.
But
That's
you've
all.
got to remember, at that
Yeah.
time, there wasn't that much business going on in the White House.
No.
The president didn't have much of a staff. Most presidents had one secretary, a male, and that was it. There was no executive
Right,
office
they
in
could
those
use
days.
the ballroom.
They
They
didn't
could
have
use
press
the dining room.
secretaries. They
Right.
didn't have domestic advisors and foreign.
That's
there
what
was no
I'm
na-
talking about right now, though, John.
Oh, today.
You know, you
Oh,
can't
yes.
consider that just as
No, but I'm
residence,
but I'm saying
you
in
know.
the.
I mean, Clinton used it as a brothel.
I know. I'm just saying
in
that
fact,
in-
you're talking about the
in
the
Lincoln's
rooms
day,
there.
it was a
Clinton
residence.
didn't
That
have
was
them
the
in
primary
for free. He
function of the
charged
building.
to go in.
And
like a drive-in
possibly
movie.
with all that is going on,
President had an
someday
office
they will
there,
not live
and he
there.
had one secretary, and that was it. That was the executive branch.
Well, for
Used
many
to be
many
known as
years,
the
the White
executive
House,
mansion.
Yeah.
There
It's a
you
official
are.
station.
Yeah.
for many years, the White House was a very overcrowded place because the president held his offices there as well as lived there.
Yeah.
And if a presidential family happened to be a large family, you were kind of pressed for space, which led them to eventually make the West Wing, which they did during Theodore Roosevelt's administration. They did extensive remodeling in the White House, which later on they would pay for because they cut into a lot of structural support beams and things to do this remodeling. So later on, when Truman came in, it was about ready to fall in because they did this. But for many years, it was a very small place and very cramped. And they actually thought at one point of just using the White House as offices
As an office.
and moving the presidential residence somewhere else. This went back to James Buchanan. Like I said, some of our presidents have loved the White House, some have hated it, and Buchanan was one that did not like it.
Was the West Wing, is it the residential side?
No, West Wing is where the president's
Businesses.
office are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where the business of the government
I never
takes
watched
place.
that show, so I don't
Yeah.
know.
But very often the
President
president's
Bartlett.
very often the
in-
president's offices were right across from his bedroom.
There were
You know, so-
proposals around the 1880s, around Grover Cleveland's time. They even have sketches of it, where they were going to triple the size they were going to create like 2 adjoining White Houses connected to the main White House, looking very similar. It looks horrible.
Yeah.
But that was
was gonna be the-
one of their proposed
believe that?
solutions.
Caroline
for
Caroline
the
Harrison,
staff.
the wife of President Benjamin Harrison, submitted a plan to have the White House wings you're talking about. I got a feeling that's what you're referring to. It almost looked like the Palace of Versailles. And they very quickly scrapped this. But what was happening to the White House, though, over the years was it was becoming a jumble of greenhouses. They loved the greenhouses in the White House. It was a real popular place after White House receptions to take people on a stroll through the White House greenhouses. Well, what they did in 1900 was they scrapped all this, tore it all down. The White House looks the way it does now, and then they put the offices in, and they no longer have that. Because it was becoming a very crowded, very dirty place. One of the most extensive renovations took place during a very little-known president, Chester Alan Arthur. When Arthur became president, and of course the president was in just before him, Garfield was assassinated and died, so not much was done to care for the White House during that time. They were just caring for the president. So when Arthur becomes president, he goes and has one of the biggest garage sales in history. He goes through the White House, he does a walkthrough, and he says, this is going to stay, that's going, this is going out to the upholsterers, we're throwing this out. He was a New York dandy, and he wanted everything redone to meet his tastes before he would even move in. So he hires Louis Comfort Tiffany, which we all know now as a jeweler, but Tiffany at that time was a very pricey interior designer. They came in, they redesigned everything, redecorated it all, and 24 wagon loads of a lot of antique furnishings got sold just at yard sale prices to get rid of them because he wanted it cleared out. One of the most famous is a big stained glass screen that they had installed in the front hall of the White House by Tiffany. No one seems to know whatever happened to the screen. It's one of those mysteries in life. They had this, I don't know if you watched the Antiques Roadshow, one time they had this come up on the Antiques Roadshow. They said it's really strange that this screen, not a shred of glass, Tiffany glass this is, from this thing exists. And for like 20 years after the Arthur administration, this became a big tourist attraction. And then Theodore Roosevelt had it taken out and
Theodore
gone.
Roosevelt had that removed.
Yeah.
And he got rid of a lot of the stuff that Arthur had put in.
No one liked Arthur. Yeah, and a lot of his decorations didn't suit everybody's tastes. That was the first time during the Arthur administration that a professional decorating team was actually brought in. Up until that time, and probably a lot long thereafter, pretty much the first ladies or the president himself could redecorate things pretty much any way they wanted to. You know, you got a free hand to do what you wanted to do with it. We are taking a break.
You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, and we're glad you are. Our panel will be right back after these announcements.
Well, friends, now that the winter season is almost here and just right around the corner, it's time to get your home ready for the winter season. And it won't be long before the snow and the ice storms will be here. So now is the time to check the roof on your home. Make sure the roof is in good shape. If you have a bad roof, your attic or crawl space will get mildew or mold, and you could get drip, drip, drip on the ceilings in your rooms, which will do damage to the ceilings. Sooner or later, you are going to have to get the roof repaired or replaced. So don't have double expense. Call Best Brothers Roofing at area code 630-616-1359, and Mike Besch will drive over in his shiny red truck with the ladders on top and Best Brothers Roofing signs on the doors. Mike will look at your roof, give you an estimate, and go from there. So once again, don't have drip, drip, drip on your ceilings or have double expense. Call Best Brothers Roofing at area code 630-616-1359 for a free estimate on your roof. That's Best Brothers Roofing, 630-616-1359. Call today for a free estimate. Once again, Best Brothers Roofing, area code 630-616-1359 for your roof.
Was that masked man?
We're back.
I have a White House.
Back to the
quiz.
Donnybrook.
Can you make it?
Before we get into our recordings that Bob Tresiak has brought with, there was one incident I seem to have heard of somewhere where Andrew Jackson was confronted by a guy with two flintlock pistols. He was gonna do him in, and both misfired.
Yes,
you ever hear that
that's
story?
right.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was that?
Yeah.
Can anybody elucidate on that one a little bit?
That's pretty much the
It was
story.
the first assassination
Yeah.
attempt on a
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Well,
Okay.
yeah.
The first
He was ushered into the man was
Oh,
ushered into the White House. The man was a Jackson
that,
hater. He didn't
yeah.
like Andrew Jackson. He came there with the intent of killing the president, and the guns misfired. Yeah.
So we,
washing my
there's
hands.
kind of a fallacy
washing
about
my hands.
politics getting more vile these days. They were really vile in the past, weren't they?
Oh, it always went on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always happened.
Well,
Yeah.
we all know the story of Giuseppe Zangara, who attempted to assassinate President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and instead, because the lady grabbed his arm, he killed Chicago
Cermak,
Mayor
yeah.
Anton J. Cermak, who it is alleged said, "I'm glad it was me and not you."
Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of President Abraham Lincoln, his only surviving son, Robert, felt he had a presidential curse on him.
Right.
Now, Robert, of course, was not present with his father when his father was killed. He was invited to come to the theater, but he declined, and he was excused by his father. So, but of course, on his death, he right away was summoned to his father's bedside. So, of course, he's with his father when his father dies from assassination.
And he was in Washington, D.C. He was at the White House. At the time.
Absolutely, he was staying in the White House. Yeah, he was released from the war, and he came home to have a sleep in a bed. He just said he was tired of being in the field, and he asked to be excused. He wanted to sleep between sheets for the first time in some months, so he was excused. But of course, he's at his father's deathbed, along with his mother. So then later on, we'll jump up a bit, and we'll go up to the administration of James Garfield, the man who just who Chester Alan Arthur came after. There again, choosing your vice presidents. Arthur was not chosen because he was presidential material. He was chosen to get him out of the port of New York. So anyway, James Garfield invites Robert Lincoln, who's now Secretary of War under the Garfield administration, to be with him when he's giving a speech at a railroad station on the 4th of July in Washington, D.C. And Robert is standing next to the president when President Garfield is assassinated. Man shoots, the shot goes through his arm, lodges into his back, and President Garfield lingers through the hot summer in Washington and then dies.
And his assassin is always described as a demented office seeker.
Yes, they
He
always
wanted
are,
a
yeah.
job. Charles Guiteau.
Now we jump up again to 1900, and William McKinley is in office, which incidentally, I don't know if we'll get to or not, but I have the recording of, just in case you missed it, we have a recording of President McKinley's funeral service. Anywho, McKinley is now in office in 1900, and Robert is asked to be at the Buffalo Exposition by the president when he's giving a speech and handshaking, meeting the crowd at the Buffalo Exposition. And Robert's there, standing alongside President McKinley. McKinley is shot. Man has his hands bandaged. A gentleman that came up just before the man that shot the president had his hand bandaged, and the president went to shake hands with him. He says, "Oh, no, left hand, Mr. President," because his hand was bandaged. So he shook hands with him in his left hand. So the other man that came up right after him, there again, talking about security being lax, had his hand bandaged too. So the president saw this, and again, he was doing the thing where he was switching hands, not knowing this man had a gun concealed in the bandage, and shot the president through his chest.
Chosgosh.
Yeah, point
very
blank.
very
How to
difficult to
pronounce
pronounce
that,
name, and he was
So
an
Robert was
anarchist.
there. Robert Lincoln was there for that. So he says, "This is it. This is three
Incredible.
presidents. I'm not appearing again with any other presidents in public. I just don't have luck with this." Well, now 1922 rolls around, and Robert, of course, by now is an older man, and he's in Washington, of course, for the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. He's got to be there. You know, this is his father. The sitting president, who we have a recording of, is President Warren G. Harding, and ex-president William Howard Taft is also there, who is now Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, appointed by Harding into that position. So Robert's very reluctant. He says, "I've had bad luck appearing with presidents in public. I don't want to do this again," but he really had no choice. This is the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. So he does it, and they have a photograph of the three men standing together, and of course Harding does not get assassinated, but 18 months into his term he dies. And San Francisco has a stroke and dies. So Robert says, "This is it, that's it. No more president stuff, that's it." He kind of retires from public life, and then 4 years later he dies himself in 1926. He never again wanted to appear with another president.
I always like to say that if he had lived, if it had been possible for him to live that long, he no doubt would have been in Dallas, Texas on December the 22nd.
Yeah, he just had very bad luck with it.
John F. Kennedy was, because I mean he was present for all three of the assassinations.
3 out of 4 presidential assassinations he was there for.
We'll
Yeah.
finally get you.
Bob, let's get to these recordings.
Yeah,
I'm,
we're gonna
I'm really.
Are we ready to go with those, or are we really set up involved?
No, not really. These were recordings that were released in the 1920s. This one happens to be a Columbia. Columbia put this series out about 1919, and they decided it was great. They've done this before on wax cylinders, and I have a couple of those, but they're just too fragile to handle around. They do have some presidential speeches by Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt that is, and William Howard Taft. Every president since Rutherford B. Hayes has made recordings.
Really?
Some of these have lasted, some of them have not. These were put out in the 1920s. They were called the Nations Forum series, and were put up at Columbia, and they had recordings of presidential candidates as well as presidents, because they didn't want to miss anything. So in case somebody got elected or not elected, they would have a recording by whoever the winner was. This recording was made by Senator Warren G. Harding just a year before he got the presidency. And it's his voice, and on the back of it, the flip side of it is Beautiful Ohio, because of course him being an Ohio man. So that's what they did. This is the voice of Warren G. Harding. Just give me a second here to get the Victrola started, and we'll play the recording. Now, what makes these recordings rare is they didn't sell all that well. They sold for about $2, which is a lot of money. And in the 1920s, you were more interested in dancing to Charleston than listening to President Warren G. Harding.
Even the Victrola.
Nationality is the call of the hearts of liberated people, and the dream of those to whom freedom becomes an undying cause. It's the guiding light, the song, the prayer, the consolation for our own people, although we were never assured indissoluble union until the Civil War was fought. Can any red-blooded American consent now, when we have come to understand its priceless value, to merge our nationality into internationality, merely because brotherhood and fraternity and fellowship and peace are soothing and appealing terms? Out of the ferment, the turmoil, the debt and echoing sorrows, out of the appalling waste and far-reaching disorder, out of the threats against orderly government and the assaults on our present-day civilization, I think, sirs, I can see the opening way for America. We must preserve the inheritance and cling to just government. We do not need and we do not mean to live within and for ourselves alone, but we do mean to hold our ideals safe from foreign incursion. We have commanded respect and confidence, commanded them in the friendships and the associations of peace, commanded them in the conflicts and comradeships of war. It's easily possible to hold the world's high estimate through righteous relationships. If our ideals of civilization are the best in the world, and I proudly believe that they are, then we ought to send the American torchbearers leading on to fulfillment. America aided in saving civilization. Americans will not fail civilization in the deliberate advancement of peace. We're willing to give, but we resent demand. I do not believe, senators, that it's going to break the heart of the world to make this covenant right, or at least free it from perils which would endanger our own independence. But it were better to witness this rhetorical tragedy than to destroy the soul of this great republic. It's a very alluring thing, senators, to do what the world has never done before. No republic has ever permanently survived. They have flashed, illumined, and advanced the world, and then faded or crumbled. I want to be a contributor to the abiding republic. None of us today can be sure that it shall abide for generations to come, but we may hold it unshaken for our day and pass it on to the next generation preserved in its integrity. This is the unending call of duty to men of every civilization. It is distinctly the American call to duty to every man who believes we have come the nearest to dependable popular government the world has yet witnessed. Let us have our America walking erect, unafraid, concerned about its rights and ready to defend them, proud of its citizens and committed to defend them, and sure of its ideals and strong to support them. We're 100 million or more today, and if the miracle of the first century of national life may be repeated in the second, the millions of today will be the myriads of the future. I like to think, sirs, that out of the discovered soul of the Republic, and through our preservative actions in this supreme moment of human progress, we shall hold the word American the proudest boast of citizenship in all the world.
Okay, that is it. That was an address.
Good speaker.
That was his, so you can see why he was presidential material. Even on an old recording like this, he comes across pretty well. That was an address he actually made to the Senate, but if you kind of picked up on some of what he was saying, he's also campaigning.
It's interesting. It's interesting to notice that it's a very formal a very classical way of speaking. Our politicians today really don't speak that way.
No.
Well-
it implies that the people that he's speaking to are educated, and that they, he's even though he's speaking to his fellow senators, but this is something he's distributing throughout the country at large.
Well,
and the other thing, and I just want to say one thing. Warren Harding comes through as just a sort of a poker-playing political hack. He was not. He was a very intelligent man. And when he cast his vote for the First World War, he voted in favor of the United States going into the First World War. He made it very clear that he was not doing it for Woodrow Wilson's reasons to make the world safe for democracy. He said it was of no concern to him what form of government any other nation had. He was voting for it because Germany posed a threat to the United States. And he felt that was the only reason we go to war when a country threatens us. It's a very contemporary issue. He did not believe America should be sending its forces around the world to try to create democratic governments.
Like we're doing now.
Yeah, he was very much that our military is here to defend the United States. We go to war when a country is a threat to us.
Well, that's the difference between what we have now, politicians, and somebody like this who's a statesman.
There you are.
We don't have
And he was.
statesmen anymore.
And he doesn't
we
get the
have
credit.
typical politicians that all they do is talk.
Yeah, part of the reason he sounds the way he sounds on this recording was just because the way they were recorded. Now, this is in the days before electricity and recordings. They actually have a photograph of him standing in front of a large metal horn, which was acoustic horns.
Right.
That's how they did the recordings before microphones came into the studios. And your voice went through the horn, and the sound of your voice cut the wax, and that's how you made the record. So they would do like 1 or 2 practice tries, and then they would do the actual recording to hear how it sounded. So all the presidents did this. Well, all of them, I should say, since Rutherford B. Hayes, they all made recordings. Some of them sounded okay, some of them did not. Theodore Roosevelt's recordings, he almost sounds like Donald Duck. They come off very badly. He was not a real good public speaker. William Howard Taft had a real good voice for acoustic recording. He made it into the acoustic, and his recordings sound real good. Some of them did, some of them didn't. This was, like I said, this was something Columbia did in an effort for the candidates to reach the people, pre-radio. And they were selling these recordings, 12-inch discs, for $2, which was a lot of money to spend in those days for a recording of this nature. So that's why these are very rare recordings, because they didn't sell all that well. These came up, but it was a way, like you say, for the candidates to reach the people. Harding himself, like you just mentioned, had some good ideas and was a good president. The unfortunate thing about him is he was surrounded by a lot of bad men. He had one of the most corrupt
Teapot
cabinets
Dome.
in history. Yeah, and then that Teapot Dome scandal came out. And also, too, he had the little house on K Street in Washington, D.C., which they called the Second White House. And that's where his girlfriend lived, and all the bootlegger was. So the Ohio gang and the president could always be seen at the little house on K Street, and everybody knew about it. They said, oh, yeah, that's the Second White House. They used to do it on tours. People would tour Washington, they would say, there's the White House, and there's the Second White House. So it was well known. And they actually also think that his wife, Florence Harding, on his stroke, on his death, because she would not allow an autopsy and because of the haste of his burial, they think that she may have poisoned her husband because she was jealous because of his girlfriend. His wife, Florence, was the driving force behind him in the presidency. They ran a newspaper in Ohio, in Marion, Ohio. The Hardings ran a paper, and Florence Harding was divorced and actually had a child before she married Warren G. Harding. And she was a driving force behind his presidency. And she was actually, in spite of her image that we may think of her now, if you know anything about her, she was actually a very good first lady, and she made a big effort to outreach to the people. Unfortunately, or I should say fortunately or unfortunately, depending which way you look at it, Florence Harding became caught up with the spiritualist movement in the 1920s. Seances, ghosts, spirit mediums, all this stuff, fortune tellers were all brought into the White House, and she was trying to contact every president and first lady, that preceded her. Yeah.
No wonder you know so much about her, Bob.
Oh yeah, that's right in my alley. Yeah.
He knew her.
Some years ago, I was in Marion, Ohio. Have you ever been to Marion, Ohio?
I've never been to Marion, Ohio. No.
His home, Harding's home, is a museum. You can visit. When we went there was a very old gentleman who'd been there for many years and gave us practically a personal tour, and he knew everything about Harding. And then of course they have a museum attached to it, which is very interesting. And there's a huge shrine where Harding and his wife are buried. It's almost like it's a circular. It's something like the Roman Colosseum is the best way. It's out in the country in a grove. It was designed at the time of his death when he was the death of Harding was like the death of John F. Kennedy for us. It was just a horrible tragedy. But after he died,
then
the
Teapot
scandals came out, and by the time they're ready to dedicate this tomb, no one wants to be associated with Harding. But Coolidge, to his credit, many of his advisors told Coolidge not to go there, but Coolidge felt he was obligated to go there. It had been the president. He had chosen him as his running mate. So Coolidge did go there, but at this point, no one wanted to be in any way associated with Warren Harding because of all the scandals that were erupting in Washington.
So
there's
down
this
the
huge
drain.
mausoleum, as it were, and
Is there room there for his girlfriend then?
no, I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Yeah, the Hardings were a childless couple, although Florence had been married before, and so she had a daughter. I think it was a daughter she had from a previous marriage. Although you never heard about that, because in those days that was a big scandal. You know, in those days we kind of protected our presidents. Nowadays, everything we know about as it happens. The gentleman that succeeded, of course, Warren Harding as president on his death was Calvin Coolidge. Everybody knows him as Silent Cal because he never said too much. And Coolidge was a very good president. He carried the country through the 1920s up to 1929 when he made his famous statement, "I do not choose to run for president." And his wife, Grace Coolidge, one of the most beautiful first ladies we've ever had, very beautiful portrait of her wearing a red gown standing with their pet Airedale. Coolidges were very much into animals and pets. They loved that a lot. Animals ran wild in the White House when the Coolidges were in there. And also at this time, too, we started, here again, the psychic movement in the 1920s and all this regenerated itself. And Abraham Lincoln's ghost appears to Grace Coolidge. It's the first time we make note of Abraham Lincoln's ghost appearing. And she says she went into the Yellow Room, which in Lincoln's day was his library, and she said she was surprised to see the president with his arms folded behind his back, staring out the window across the Potomac. On the First Lady's entrance, he turned, acknowledged her, nodded his head to her, and then just diminished right in front of her eyes. And a lot of people said this is because the Lincolns went through the same thing the Coolidges went through. When the Lincolns were in the White House, they lost a son, Willie. Willie died on the Lincolns in the White House, and it was a great mourning for the president and First Lady. And the Coolidges lost a son in the White House. They had two sons, and they lost one of their sons. He was playing tennis. The boys were playing tennis. The one boy got a blister on his foot. The blister festered. In those days, no antibiotics. It went into blood poisoning and went through his system and killed him within a matter of days. So it was a very, very sad thing for the Coolidges. So it was kind of a peller on their White House, too. And that's when Coolidge made his famous statement. He said, if ever a young boy comes to the White House and asks to see the president, no questions about it. He's to be ushered in. I don't care where I'm at. I want to see him. That was his little thing he did for the people. It was a memorial to the death of his son.
When Warren Harding died, Coolidge is at his home in New England when he receives word that the president has died. And so his father, who was still alive and was a notary public, administered the oath of office to Calvin Coolidge. And the nation just took this story up. I mean, this story was so sentimental. The idea of this man, this humble New Englander in his back, and it was a farm, an isolated farm out in the middle of nowhere, and the idea of his own father administering the oath to Calvin Coolidge, it instantly made Coolidge, just beloved by the American people. But what's not known is that Coolidge, being a stickler for constitutionality, felt that because his father wasn't a federal officer, just to be on the safe side, when he got to Washington, he had the oath administered by a federal judge.
Yeah, a lot of people actually said that. They said
but that they did not publicize.
Yeah, they said for about 30 days there was no president because he wasn't actually sworn and it wasn't legal. Yeah.
Well, we'll be right back to the discussion following this short intermission.
Get on with these. Get on.
Are you looking for a real good place to have lunch or dinner? Well, friends, I have just the right place for you to go. And that is Sorrento's Village Restaurant and Pizzeria, which is located at 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park. Now, every Friday, every Friday from 5 p.m. until 8:30 p.m., you can enjoy their all-you-can-eat buffet and pasta bar for just $11.95 for adults and $7.95 for kids 10 and under. Sorrento's is proud to introduce its Friday night buffet with pasta bar made to order. Fresh pasta with your choice of vodka, 4-cheese Alfredo, marinated sauce, plus Sorrento's meatballs and sausage, and oh, is that delicious. And a buffet that is bursting with flavors from risotto, seafood, and chicken dishes. and a variety of Sorrento's pizza, and a full salad bar and garlic bread to go with it. Again, just $11.95 for adults, $7.95 for kids and under, all you can eat. And you can also enjoy their affordable, fast, perfect, full-service catering that might sound expensive, but when you choose Sorrento's, we do the work and you take the applause for a memorable party, shower, barbecue, block party, whatever party you plan to have, or use one of our 4 beautiful buffet banquet rooms accommodating 20 to 200 guests and plenty of free parking. Many catering orders can be even prepared the same day or within 24 hours. Remember, for the best food in town, go to Sorrento's Village Restaurant and Pizzeria, which is located at 2318 Manheim Road in Melrose Park. They are just south of Fullerton Avenue on the west side of the street, plenty of free parking. You can call Frank or Sam at area code 847-455-9440. Now, if you go there for lunch, no other weekday lunch buffet is like it. Sorrento's weekday lunch buffet is perfect for business get-togethers, even funeral luncheons, soup, salad, pasta, pizza, vegetable, freshly baked bread, meat or fish, plus dessert. For group prices, call area code 847-455-9440. On Tuesdays, purchase a regular price soft drink and enjoy a famous buffet at half off from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So once again, for the best food in town, try Sorrento's Village Restaurant, which is located at 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park.
And yet,
We're back.
yeah.
I mean, we're back. Sorry, Governor.
I'll be back.
Get it? Get it? Yeah, well, we're getting. We have another recording to play, but this makes me think of what came down to the next guy, which we would have been Herbert Hoover running against in 1928. Al Smith, governor of New York, who was a Catholic, the first guy to go.
Yeah.
The radio.
And of course, there was some very, very nasty stuff written about Mr. Smith and being a Catholic. And at the end, when he lost to Hoover, he sent a one-word telegram to the Pope: unpack. That's what it said. So
Yeah.
It had
Guess
been
we've gotten
said
over
that if
that
he
now,
was
haven't we?
elected, that the Pope was going to move to the United States, live in the White House, and run the country.
They said that I remember when
Not
Kennedy
that
got elected, the
JFK
same thing went
too.
around. Yeah, they said he's going to be taking his orders from the Pope. The Pope's going to be
we've
running the
gotten over
country.
that, and I think we've gotten past with Mr. Romney too about the being a Mormon. I don't think that was.
It didn't seem as though that had any bearing on them.
No.
I mean, unless it was out there as an
It
undercurrent. I didn't see
was
any.
out there.
Some
There may,
fundamental
there may well have been
Yeah.
people who didn't
I'm
vote
sure.
for him for that reason, but it didn't surface
Right.
as an issue.
Yeah.
It was an issue to some people if they didn't
Why-
vote for him.
I
Stayed away.
I'm just saying that it wasn't talked about. It didn't.
Oh, yes, it was. I don't know why you missed it, John.
Religious convictions really should.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Oh,
affect
yeah.
I wanted a good
personal
discussion of the
people.
Mormon faith.
You know,
Don't think that way.
Personally, other than those breakaway guys, those different sects that broke away from the church, I can't think of a more law-abiding or productive group than the Mormons in the country.
One of the things,
myself.
They don't
one of
drink
the
it.
things that hurt Al Smith, as much as his Catholicism was certainly an issue, but radio had just come into its own at that time. That was the first
Voice?
campaign that really was brought,
Where they heard
and
it.
the first time they heard, well, this is Al Smith. I'm the candidate for president. Let me tell you how things are in a big city, ladies and gentlemen, on the sidewalks. And that voice just grated
Yeah, I
on
think
the
you're right.
ears of 3/4 of the country who weren't accustomed to a New York accent. They hadn't, they weren't as
The
aware
R's
of
weren't
it.
coming through.
And
right.
it just
Another
that,
thing-
that had as much to do, I think, as his
It hurt him in Game 2 when he got the beer dumped on him in left field, right?
Oh yeah, that was a different Al Smith.
Oh, I thought it was the same guy.
That was a different Al Smith in playing for the Chicago White Sox.
Number 16. Hit 17 homers in 59.
He's a South Sider.
Yeah.
You know,
Can't help it.
Coolidge was once introduced to who was presented to him as a star with the Chicago Bears, and Coolidge said, well, "I'm very happy to meet you. I've always loved Animal Acts."
Yeah. What was the other one he said?
You lose.
Yeah.
You lose.
I bet I can make you say more than two.
Yeah, Silent Cal. Yeah,
I thought there was one more.
For all the brouhaha about him, Calvin Coolidge had a good sense of humor, which he loved to play tricks on the White House staff. He would often ring all the bells and have them all coming up, and they would say, "What's the emergency?" And he'd say, "Nothing. I just want to see if you're on your toes." And he'd often greet the staff in the mornings when they were arriving for work. He'd greet them outside with a stopwatch in his hand, clocking them in, and he says, "You made it just under the weather, didn't you?" And his wife would often prod him about that and saying, "They're not going to know that you have the sense of humor that you have. They're going to think you're serious about this,
So he was a real Yankee, a New Englander?
And he also took over the kitchens in the White House. He was the first president that did that. He went down and he talked to the head housekeeper, Mrs. Jaffrey, and just threw her to the winds and said, "Look, you're not going to be taking order from the First Lady. The kitchen is not one of her favorite areas. It's one of mine." He said, "I want these adjustments made to everything in the White House. I want you cutting down on expenses. Don't buy strawberries when they're out of season. I want all this done. I want all that done. And this is the way I want the kitchens run." And she was just flabbergasted. She says, "In all my time, I've only dealt with the first ladies." He says, "Well, then it'll be a nice relief for you because you'll be dealing with me." And it wasn't too long after that he fired Mrs. Jaffrey from the White House housekeeping staff. Yeah, they did not get along. Anyway, what I've got now,
some kind of one of them male chauvinist pigs or something?
No, he was just a very headstrong man, and he had different frugal ideas about the way things should be run in the White House. Except when it came to his wife, spare no expenses to Grace Coolidge, whatever she wanted to spend for her clothing allowance. But he himself would wear his old battered suits, and there was nothing left of them. Mm-hmm. But as far as the First Lady was concerned, she was the top dog. And but he ran the nation very frugally at a time when spending, in the 1920s, people were spending really freely, and he reduced the national deficit to zero when he left office.
How times have changed.
Yeah.
Him back.
Times have changed.
If you read history today and after the Depression, they always pair Hoover and Coolidge together as though they were like Siamese twins, peas, and that is totally untrue. Opposite. Coolidge did not like Hoover. He appointed him to his cabinet, but he used to sarcastically refer to him as the Wonder Boy. This was before Batman. The term Boy Wonder hadn't been coined yet, but it was pretty much the same thing. He thought he was a flash in the pan. He thought he was a guy Hoover had never been in politics. He'd never run for office. He was very popular with the press. He was a progressive Republican. What people don't realize today is Hoover was not a diehard conservative. He was actually from the progressive wing of the Republican Party. He had been part of the Wilson administration, and Coolidge did not like Hoover. So when you read these histories, and it's always Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover as though they were the three musketeers.
Oh my.
No,
three enemies.
No, and nothing could be further from the truth.
However, a gentleman we mentioned earlier, Harry Truman, loved Hoover, and he often sought the advice of the ex-president. Hoover, for him being what he, for the time he served, at the time of the Great Depression, was not a very beloved president, obviously, because of what happened. But he was a very intelligent man for all the brouhaha about him, and he knew what he was doing. It just he had the misfortune of being the president when the market crashed.
And he became more conservative. He became much more of a conservative Republican after he left the White House. In later years, then he does become a very spokesman for what you'd call the conservative wing of the party. But prior to that, no, he had really been looked upon as a more liberal Republican.
We have another. By the way, Bob, thanks for bringing these.
Very sure.
Anything you have, you can bring some more.
We got more stuff. Yeah, if you listen to my show tonight on paranormal radioactivity,
I just wonder if Coolidge ever really said when a lot of people are out of work, unemployment results.
Yeah, he did it. Yeah, he said that. Yeah, he said unemployment is a result of people being out of work.
Very good.
He's alleged to have said the business of America is business.
And he said that's the one time the press quoted me right. That's what he said, yeah. So he did have a lot of witticisms, in spite of the fact that he was known as Silent Cal for not saying too much. Yeah.
Supposedly with Hoover, too, he could sit down at a cabinet meeting, whatever. Everyone would say their question around the table. He would go back without writing anything down and answer you after he's heard all of them.
They spoke Chinese. Hoover's President Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou Hoover spoke Mandarin Chinese. Do we have to do something? You're looking. Oh, okay. I thought we were going to take a break or something. This is what I do when I'm on my show. They look, because I just go and I keep going and going, and they look at me and they say, "We got to stop and do a public service." Okay, we'll be right back.
We'd love to hear your record.
So anyway, we're here.
So we have another one. It's a party record, folks. So you better get the kids out of the room.
Yeah.
Sorry,
this one is actually, this one is actually going back a few years. This goes back to about 1901 actually, and this is a record that they made, of course, on the death of McKinley. Mourning being real big stuff at that time. And if you were unable to attend the funeral service of McKinley, what they did is they actually went into the studios and they recorded the prayer, which is like the Our Father and some of the things, some hymn singing, and a little bit of the speech, the homily they gave over the president's voice. Of course, it's very condensed because it's on a 10-inch record, so it's only about a minute and a half long. There's not a lot to it. McKinley never made it to the recording studios. He would have made some records. He would have recorded on a wax cylinder for the studios, but he never did. He got shot. So they did record speeches. There was a man in those days, his name was Len Spencer, and he did a lot of vaudeville recordings and renegade recordings and things, and he would record speeches by the late President McKinley. But they always made certain they let the public know this was not McKinley's voice you were hearing. This was someone else just giving fragments of the speeches.
Anyway, it was kind of like Vaughn Meader with the First Family.
Yeah. So this is a record that they sold, and they weren't taking it. It was sold by Sears Roebuck and Company. These were sold for about 35 cents, and it was an Oxford record. And Oxford kind of preceded Silvertone, which became much more famous. People know the Sears Silvertone brand. Before that, it was Oxford, and that was around the turn of the century. And this is the record. It's just a funeral service of the late President McKinley.
I was just saying, just the sinking like Titanic.
She's over 100 years old, isn't she?
1901. Fall of 1901.
Well, that's that. Audio quality not the best on this one because this is a much more older recording. So,
Also an acoustic one?
oh yeah. These were all acoustically recorded. This is about 1901. Yeah.
Imagine, over 100 years old.
Oh yeah. Now McKinley. Just a little interesting fact about him is the McKinleys were a childless couple. They lost 2 daughters in infancy, and the shock of this left his wife, Ida Saxton McKinley, with epilepsy. All of her life she was plagued by this. And at state dinners and things in the White House, they would rearrange the protocol where she would sit next to the president. So if she had a seizure, he could come to her assistance right away. And he would often throw a handkerchief over her face during a seizure, and then she'd come to, and she was fine. In receiving lines, she would often be seated with a bouquet of flowers in her hands, so she wouldn't shake hands with folks, just because they were never sure when she was going to have a seizure or anything. But he knew how to handle her. And oddly enough, on his death, for the 6 years she lived after him, she never again suffered another seizure after his death. Yeah, so it was really strange. So I think maybe the strain of her worrying about him had something to do with it. So that's just that little tidbit of history from the past for us.
Interesting.
Excuse me. I also read or heard that when we brought up Lincoln, that Mary Todd Lincoln was left homeless after.
Oh my gosh! How many shows do you want to do on Mary Todd Lincoln?
I know.
We can. Oh, there were many strange things.
But I mean,
what happened to Mary Todd?
Yeah.
Well, Mary Todd was always afraid of poverty all of her life, even though she was born to a wealthy family. She was always afraid of poverty, but she was never able to control her spending. All her life she had this, and this became really apparent when the Lincolns were in the White House. The White House, they were allowed, I think, $7,000 for redecorating. None of the Lincolns were talking about $7,000 for redecorating and refurbishing the White House. And Mary Todd would take these shopping excursions to New York City and just spend like you couldn't believe. She would spend $10,000 just on carpeting alone for the East Room, and then come back and hide the bills from her husband, so he wouldn't see me. He was actually worried about not getting reelected.
It became a political scandal.
How they were going to pay for the bills.
Were very critical of all the money that in time. Remember, this is time of war.
Oh yeah, very strange.
She's spending money on curtains and rugs and furniture.
Lincoln himself, he said, I can't buy horses and blankets for the soldiers, and you spend $10,000 on a carpet and flub dubs for this damned old house, you know. So he was, so he was very mad about that. But he was unable to control it, and she was unable to control this. Later in life, after his death, it never left her. She wore nothing but black and widow's garb for the rest of her life after her husband's death. And she would walk around the streets of Chicago. She lived in Chicago for a time with $56,000 in pockets in her petticoats because she was afraid someone was going to steal her money and she was going to end up in poverty. Her son Robert, finally, after many, many years of strange behavior, and no one's really quite sure what her ailment exactly was, Lincoln himself felt she had a partial mental illness, not understood, of course, in the 19th century. What was understood about mental illness? Not much.
Kind of manic.
It could have been a postpartum depression. It could have been bipolar. No one knew. And then, of course, they lost a son in Springfield, Eddie, before they came to the White House, losing Willie in the White House, then her husband's death, and then later on she lost her other son, Tad, at 18 years old, so she only had Robert left. So Robert finally was forced to commit her to a hospital here in Illinois, in Batavia, to a mental institution where she did not stay for too long. She also became a spiritualist and started writing letters and things to her friends to get her out of there, which she was able to do. What finally was the straw that broke the camel's back for Robert was she had been in Europe, and she was convinced that Robert was dying. So she hopped the first liner she could get to carry across the Atlantic. She came barging through his home, only to find him sitting in the chair, perfectly healthy, nothing wrong with him, but she was convinced Robert was dying. And then also, too, she tried to jump out of a second-story window from a fire that didn't exist. She was escaping a fire, so Robert finally decided something had to be done with her. And he was...
There are so many cheap shots taken at Mary Todd Lincoln. In her defense, as he indicated,
she had
three of her children died in her lifetime. She's present to see her husband assassinated, the President of the United States. She was reviled during the war as a traitor because her family were from Kentucky. They were many of her relatives fought for the South during the Civil War. She was roundly criticized. So she had, she went through an awful lot that could explain her mind being, having some problems.
She never again, on her release from Batavia, from the mental institution, she never again lived in the home in Springfield that she owned with her husband and her sons. She never again lived there. She lived with a sister in Springfield. And later in life, her big occupation in life was packing and unpacking trunks. With all these thousands and thousands of dollars worth of purchases, draperies for a home she never owned, different colored gowns and things she was never going to wear because all she wore was black. All these things she purchased, she was just packing and unpacking for trips she was never going to take. That was like her occupation late in life,
Bob, I want you to give us the times of your programs.
Oh, yeah, I'll be on tonight. Tonight, 8 o'clock, I'll be on WARG Radio, WARG, and that's at 88.9 FM, all the way down the end of your FM dial. If you can't get us, you can streamline it. You can get us on the computer, and you can listen online. And I'll be on there.
WARG.com?
WARG.com. I will be on there. Yeah. I'll be on there tonight. We're going to be doing You Bet Your Life. If you all remember the old quiz show, You Bet Your Life, say the secret word, and you win an extra $50. We don't do $50.
George, would you bring out the next guest?
Yeah, but you do win a prize. So we kind of revitalized You Bet Your Life. We're doing that. We'll be doing that at 8, and then at 9 o'clock this evening, I've got a paranormal team coming on. They're called Chicago Paranormal Researchers. They're going to come on and talk about paranormal research and hauntings in the area and all that good stuff. And then also, too, I had found an article in last week's Southtown... what is our
Southtown Star now?
The Southtown Star.
The Economist.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Yeah, and there was an article in there about the oldest recording that they found from 1878. So it says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring a recording on of Thomas Edison. How many times have you heard Thomas Edison speaking on the radio? So I've got a cylinder recording, and it was called Let Us Not Forget. And it's Thomas Edison's thoughts on the aftermath of World War I. And they released this for sale to the public. And it's the only time Edison allowed his voice to be recorded for sale. That's the only time he ever did. So we're going to play that cylinder. It's a cylinder recording. I'll be playing that on the air tonight. And, we just do all kind of fun stuff.
At 9 o'clock?
Come on at 9 o'clock with Paranormal. That's when we're going to be doing the recording. And You Bet Your Life will be on at 8 before that. And then next week, Monday, I'm not certain who I'm going to have on there. I kind of do my guests a couple weeks in advance. I got a couple of people lined up for next week, Monday's show. And then next week, Thursday, the 29th, I'll be at the Bridgeview Library over on 79th Street in Bridgeview. And talking on paranormal there. And Red, if he shows up tonight, is going to co-host with me on You Bet Your Life. If he feels,
George Fenneman.
Yeah, if he feels like doing it. I don't know if he's gonna pop in or not.
We'll see.
If you feel up to it.
Welcome to You Bet Your Life. Say the secret word and divide $100.
Yeah,
Common word, something you hear every day.
When I first went to them with the idea for the show for You Bet Your Life, they said, "Oh, you're gonna be just like Groucho." And I says, "No, how do you follow Groucho? You can't. No, there's just no way." So we do it, but we do it a little differently.
Stop in and see your DeSoto Plymouth Theater.
Yes.
Groucho's in you.
A little sidelight about Groucho Marx. At the beginning of every season of You Bet Your Life, Groucho would go out and buy a sport coat. And he would wear that coat in every episode of the show for that season.
Really?
And then he would send a bill to NBC for like 19, it was the cheapest coat he could get. And they'd get a bill every year for like $19.95, and it would say TV coat.
Groucho suffered
because he had lost all his money in the
Yes, I was just going to say, Groucho
crash. He was
suffered
very
all of his
tight
life.
with
He
the
suffered.
dollars.
He suffered from
Very careful with
insomnia,
the dollars.
and he was always worried about poverty because I seen what happened to actors in old age, and he had that happen to him with his brother Chico, because Chico died kind of broke from gambling debts and loose women and all that kind of stuff. So Groucho would, help Chico out a lot too. He was always afraid that was going to happen to him, but it never did. Yeah.
Wasn't Frank Sinatra's last wife Chico's wife before
I
that?
don't know.
Barbara Marx.
Barbara Marx.
Yeah, that I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was married to Chico's ex-wife. Was Frank Sinatra's?
Is she a
Barbara
Marx?
I don't know. That sounds possible, but I'm not sure if that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not certain. Yeah, I know a lot about Groucho, but I don't know that much about
the wrong guy, but I believe it was.
Chico was a card player, and spent money. Easy come, easy go.
One of my most famous one of my favorite Groucho stories is why Harpo never spoke. Groucho says, a lot of people don't know this. Why Harpo? We never let Harpo speak. He says, well, we were doing vaudeville. And on the vaudeville circuit, you go from, theater to theater, and you go on the trains, and you go from place to place. And there's one time I walked on stage, and I was smoking a cigar. And the theater manager said, that's $50. And he says, I'm not putting it out. He says, that's $100. Theater managers were God in those days. You did what they wanted you to do. So $100, now we're talking pre-World War I, this is quite a bit of money. So Groucho says, fine, I'll pay you the $100, but this is what we're going to do. So the Marx Brothers went out on stage, and they didn't perform. They just stood there. They kind of looked around. They did nothing. Curtain closed. Theater manager paid them in pennies, and they were counted. Them being who they were, they counted every penny to make sure it was there. So they missed the train. They were late for their next vaudeville engagement. So when they were on the train, they says, Harpo stood on the back of the train and said, I hope that guy's theater burns down. He said, the next day we read about it in the paper that it did. After that, we thought it was too dangerous for Harpo to ever speak again.
That's interesting.
I will leave you with that, and thank you so much, folks. It's been a pleasure being here with you.
Yeah, Robert's got to leave us early, so.
Yeah.
I'm listening to your recording.
Good having you, Bob.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Good having you.
It's a pleasure being here. Yeah, it's nice to do these kind of things because, you're not certain who they appeal to and who they don't. Yeah.
One quick question. I've heard that the earliest president of which we have an existing recording is Grover Cleveland. Does anything exist prior? Because you talked about going back to Garfield.
We do have the voice of Grover Cleveland, but it was not made during his presidency. It was made like around 1908 when he was out of his presidency. He was already an old man.
He gave a speech. I've heard it. It sounds like, no, my friend. He's bellowing into that megaphone.
That's it. Yeah. A lot of these, you can find some of this stuff up on YouTube if you go up and punch up some of these names, and some of these things will come up. They'll do that. And then, of course, a lot of the speeches were fake, too, because some of the presidents they didn't have, so they had somebody else doing their voice, Yeah. But most of them, all of them, from Rutherford B. Hayes on, made recordings, although how many of these recordings exist, we don't know, Yeah. And then the ones, of course, that were offered for sale, these turn up from time to time. You find them. The wax cylinder recordings of Teddy Roosevelt, President William Howard Taft, those turn up. Woodrow Wilson, Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, everybody thereafter, they kind of turn up. Some of these were done on cylinder, and the later ones were done on disc. Sears didn't take any chances. They issued them both. They sold them both on cylinder and disc for people that own both types of machines.
Wouldn't you think they're very valuable now?
I don't really know. They're valuable to me as a collector because I enjoy having them. I like them, and I do keep them all recorded on cassettes, just in case something ever happens and the disc gets broken or something like that. But money-wise, I don't know. That I don't. I never really checked into it. Yeah.
Just to have them is wonderful.
From a collector's point of view,
It's like there's the trivia question: who was the first president to appear on television? And people think it's Franklin Roosevelt because somebody would say Harry Truman because they'd probably figure it after the war. People know that FDR opened the New York World's Fair, and they already had limited television broadcasting in New York City only, NBC, in 1939. So they did broadcast that. But actually the first president, although he wasn't president at the time, was Herbert Hoover. When he was Secretary of Commerce, he appeared on an experimental broadcast with television. So, although he wasn't actually president at the time, he is the first president to appear on television.
With one other question I saw the other day was, who are the 5 American presidents who are not buried in the U.S.?
Not buried in the U.S.?
No.
Good question.
This has to be a trick question.
It is a trick question.
Yeah, it's got to be a trick
Barack
question.
Obama,
Carter,
George
The
Bush,
presidents that are alive.
Clinton, Bush.
all the presidents who are
Obama.
still alive and have
Yeah.
not been buried.
That's like that. That's like that
I
question
have a
about the.
little quiz too.
That's
down the
that's
line.
that's like that question about the plane crash on the border between Canada and the United States. Where do you bury the survivors? You don't bury the
I
survivors.
don't.
Right.
What's your trivia question? You got some White House trivia for us?
Well, it's
Let's hear it.
kind of
And then on that, I'll depart.
a multiple choice, but I'm not going to let you do that. I just want to ask you and answer for you. Who was the first president born an American citizen?
Martin Van Buren.
Martin Van Buren, old Kinderhook.
Martin Van
You
Buren.
are
yeah.
so right, and he was born after 1776. Who was the first president to take the nation into a declared war?
James
wait a minute.
Madison.
You
War
are
of
so
1812.
right. Oh
12?
my goodness,
Yep.
somebody's going to win the car. Which president was the first to be elected after all women won the vote?
Warren G. Harding.
Harding, 1920.
Yeah, that's right. It's the
Yeah.
first time that women could vote,
After the
vote, and that.
Yeah, he always said that. He says, the women pulled the lever and I got in. Yeah.
Who was the first poet to take part in a presidential
that?
inauguration?
Robert
Robert
Frost,
Frost,
1961.
Men
Kennedy.
are too smart, and
We
in
read the
his
same
case,
paper.
yeah. Did you all memorize it? The thing was that he did the gift outright by heart because of
He
maybe
didn't
John
read. He didn't.
couldn't-
He didn't read the poem he was supposed to because it was so cold. I guess
That's
his
right.
glasses were all fogging up. So,
Yes,
so he
and
recited
the glare
something
of
from
the light
Yeah,
he could
Too much
not
frost.
read.
So from memory,
So
he gave something
he
else.
did that
there.
one by heart,
Too much
as
frost,
I say.
huh?
Jack said there was too much frost.
Name 2 of the 4 presidents to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Barack Obama
Teddy Roosevelt.
and T.R.
Woodrow Wilson and Jimmy Carter.
Now this time,
Jimmy
Yeah.
Carter.
they think Obama, he got the
But he got it after.
but now he's going to get the Heisman Trophy, the Cy Young Award.
And a Tony. And an
Which
Emmy.
woman was the first to pursue her career before she became First Lady?
Oh,
That
there
would
were
have
a few.
been
Jackie Kennedy?
Abigail
No.
Fillmore.
Abigail Fillmore, Grace
Uh-huh.
Coolidge,
What'd she do?
taught the deaf. What did Abigail
Yeah.
Fillmore do? What was her vocation
She
in life?
was a school teacher.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to interpret
She
something.
taught him.
Actually,
she educated
she taught
Fillmore.
him. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we should interpret, was he a college student or was
he was
she
just-
his teacher?
No, she
throughout-
just sort of tutored him because he had
Oh,
he
is
had not
that
had he did not come from a wealthy background, hadn't had the opportunity
Uh-huh.
to get a great deal of
Okay.
education.
During the
I
during the
was
Fillmore
trying to
administration,
interpret,
they
too, the
modernized the
timing.
kitchens and they actually put in a cast iron stove with dampers into the kitchen of the White House. Up until that time, all the cooking was done on fireplaces, and
Fillmore-
nobody knew how to work the stove. So the president took a trip to the patent office himself and said, "Send somebody over to show us how to work this thing."
Wait a minute, wasn't that Kenmore, not Fillmore?
Yeah, right. Later on,
Or Frigidaire?
Who was the first vice president to become president when the previous
well, we said that
officer
earlier. That was
died?
Tyler.
Tippecanoe and Tyler,
Tyler,
too.
yeah.
That's right, and Harrison died 31 days later. Which former president was elected to the House of Representatives
John
after
Johnson.
serving his
Adams.
term?
Andrew Johnson.
Aren't they? Isn't this the smartest panel? Did I tell you that?
I've
when
seen
we
that
And he,
picture.
and he
started?
died on the floor. He died
And he
literally on
died
the floor of the
and
house.
Yeah, given an address.
collapsed,
Yeah.
while he was in that position. Which 4 presidents were assassinated?
Well, we did that. That was Garfield, McKinley,
Kennedy,
and Lincoln.
Lincoln.
You are
Yeah.
so right. Who named the first African American Supreme Court justice?
Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Yep.
He certainly did, and
Thurgood
that
Marshall.
was
Marshall.
Thurgood
Thurgood Marshall.
Marshall. Yes, 100%. All of you.
My
all
fellow
three.
Americans, I'm proud to be here tonight with a heavy heart.
Heavy heart.
I come here not as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines and the CIA, but rather as the poor barefoot boy from the Pedernales River Valley who is now your king.
All the way with
Marvelous
LBJ?
thing, is it?
All the way with LBJ,
With
right?
LBJ.
We should have John make.
What
a
year did they
record
install?
of all
What year
the
did they install the
presidents.
first telephone in the White House?
Oh.
Interesting. First telephone in the White House. What year?
19th century.
Well, obviously, yeah.
I think it was Cleveland.
No, it was a little before that. It was during the administration of Rutherford B. Hayes. They put the telephone in, and all it was a wire that ran right through the window out to the Capitol building and the Senate, and in the White House was phone number 1. White House was number 1. That was the
There were
phone
two
number.
cans, right? Two
That was
cans.
about it. Yeah, and every time it rang, the president ran to answer it because he loved talking on the telephone.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And there was one key to the front door of the White House which is never locked.
Yeah.
The door was put on by Thomas Jefferson. It survived the fire, and there's one key to that door, and that front door is never locked.
Never.
Never.
To
Never
this
locked.
day?
Yep. Never locked. Yeah. That door survived the fire.
Well guarded.
Jefferson put it in before Madison came in, him being the 3rd president, Madison being the 4th when they burnt the White House. The door survived the fire. They only had one key surviving. They never bothered making another key, and they never changed the door. And it is never locked. Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
amazing?
All these little tidbits about the White House.
Yeah, I think that's marvelous.
Yeah, come and listen.
I'm sure it's well guarded.
In 2
though.
weeks when I'm talking at about the White House at the library, you'll hear all kind of things about the White House you didn't know. All about the ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, folks. I have to depart.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you very much.
Thank you for
Does
all
that
your
bring us
good
down?
Yes, happy
information.
Thanksgiving to all of you.
Yes.
Too. Thank you. And Red, I don't know if I'll see you later
right
tonight.
Back after these announcements. Please stay tuned and don't touch that dial.
Exhibitors Carpet has changed their name to Carpet Warehouse at 4300 West Montrose Avenue in Chicago, and their new location at 440 Sheridan Road in Highwood, Illinois, called Carpet of Highwood. Stop in and see Mike at Carpet Warehouse, 4300 Montrose Avenue, and the phone number there is area code 773-283-0100, or see Brian Muir at 440 Sheridan Road in Highwood, and their number out there is area code 847-266-1400. For carpets in your living room, dining room, bedroom, den, family room, or wherever, stop in at either location for a great deal. Once again, you can see Mike at Carpet Warehouse, 4300 West Montrose Avenue, and their phone number is area code 773-283-0100 in Chicago, or Carpet of Highwood at 440 Sheridan Road, and the phone number there is area code 847-266-1400. Remember, if you need carpet for your living room, dining room, den, or family room, stop in and see Mike, once again, at 4300 Montrose Avenue, Chicago, 773-283-0100, or Brian Muir at 440 Sheridan Road in Highwood, and their phone number is area code 847-266-1400.
Once more, here are our historians.
Well, thank you very much. This is John Escacholco, and I'm going to be filling in for our final section of our show today for our good friend and the man I always call our impresario, Jack Ryan, who had some other commitments and had to leave just a little bit early today. But we've had an excellent program thus far, and the segments up to this point, a lot of trivia about the presidency and the White House. So we hope you've enjoyed listening to all the tidbits of information that we've had for you today as we talk about the presidency this month of November 2012, in which we elected, or in fact re-elected, a president of the United States in our most recent presidential election. And I must admit, I suppose I should take the opportunity to say I was wrong. You may have heard me on our program last month, and I made a very bold prediction which represented my firm belief that the election would turn out very differently from the way it did. So I'm here to admit that I was wrong, and I must say I don't think I've ever been as wrong about a presidential election in my lifetime. I've usually had a pretty good sense of how things were going to go, even when I might have preferred it went the other way. but I have at least recognized that the election was going to go for the Democratic candidate in the past. This time I truly believed, as I said last month, that Mitt Romney would have been elected President of the United States, and the voters had other ideas, as we all know. So I just wanted to get that on the record, because very often when people make predictions and they're right, they remind you about it every opportunity, but when they're wrong, you don't hear about that. So this is my way of acknowledging the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, I was wrong, and I admit it.
John, in your silence, you could probably tell us what you thought went wrong, but how would you interpret, with your crystal ball, what will be said about Obama 4 years from now? And I know it's just starting, but do you see stumbling and failure? Do you see, I will put up a fight and make it right? What way would you look at this whole picture?
Well, one of the things that I've always said about people who make predictions for the future is we always have to remember that none of us know what's going to happen in the next hour and a half, let alone what's going to happen a month from now, a year from now, 4 years from now. When George W. Bush became president, he had no idea that some months into his presidency, terrorists were going to crash into skyscrapers in New York City and into the Pentagon building. The unexpected is always just around the corner. One thing, I've got many thoughts about this election. One is that second terms of presidents tend to be very unsuccessful. Our greatest presidents, the presidents we most admire, have generally had very unfulfilling and often very, very difficult second terms, going all the way back to the man I consider the greatest president of the 20th century, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was during his second term that he had the total misfire with his attempt to pack the so-called Supreme Court. He attempted to defeat some Democratic congressmen who had not supported him in the 1938 elections, and he failed miserably. The voters supported the people he wanted defeated. You look at Richard Nixon, of course, with Watergate. Watergate happened in his second term. Harry Truman's second term was a disaster. The Korean War, scandals in Washington. Truman is remembered fondly basically for his first term, for things that happened in his first term, the strong line he took against the Soviet Union. Eisenhower had medical problems in his second term. There was a recession. His party took a shellacking in the 1958 elections. Bill Clinton was impeached in his second term. And, of course, George W. Bush faced major opposition to the war in Iraq, Hurricane Katrina, and then the bottom falls out of the economy. So all I'm saying is that for those who feel that Barack Obama is riding high right now, we don't know if that's going to be the case for the 4 years that he's going to spend in the White House. So there are a number of things I think you can look at the election. I'm not optimistic. I see the economy essentially bumping along the way it has for the last 4 years, with the risk that we could see another recession, that we could actually go into what they call a double-dip recession. So I must admit, I'm not optimistic. I supported Romney because I thought he could have turned the country around. I really felt he could have been a great president.
I don't
and
have
sadly,
answers either.
Opportunity's not going to be given
Obviously,
to him.
I don't. But I thought, on a personal basis, that Obama, let's start at the first year or second year of his term, there was a tsunami that hit that front door of the White House. You had your banking problem, you had your stock problem, you had your health care problem, you had your lack of real estate working, we had our lack of jobs starting to be very dominant. So, you look at it as, well, everybody needs a chance. Let's see what they can do. My personal feeling, and possibly shouldn't express it that firmly, is that, all right, so we gave you a second chance. And, the butterfly legend of the second chance. And it seems like we're going off of the subjects that we gave the second chance about because they in themselves cannot get along to solve things. It seems like there's a a bucking of each other and a I didn't say it kind of attitude, or I will defend it even though you don't like what I'm defending. Do you understand
Sure.
what I'm trying to?
Sure, politics has changed. When I was a kid, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, while they differed on various things, they weren't that far apart.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a diversity of opinion in both parties. The Republican Party was not as conservative as it is today. The Democratic Party certainly was not as liberal as it is today. There were a lot of conservatives in the Democratic Party. The whole South was Democratic in the 50s and early 60s. They were all conservatives.
Right.
There were some northern conservative Democrats. You had the big city machines like Mayor Daley, and nobody ever accused Richard J. Daley of being a liberal. So, it was easier for the parties to come together. Today, the Democratic Party, I would argue, has moved way to the left. The Republican Party is much more conservative than it was in the past, and there is no real meeting of the minds between the... When you talk about compromise, I don't know where the grounds for compromise is, because each side essentially says, this is what we want, and we want it our way. And compromise is the other guy giving in and doing it our way. So everybody's going to go before the cameras and say, well, I think we should all sit down and work together. But when they actually sit down and work together, who's going to give in? And how much are they going to give in? And if they do give in, are the folks in their delegation, because it's easy for the leaders to say we're going to make a deal, but when they get back, they have to sell it to all the members of the Senate and the House.
Which has been a
and
huge
how many of
problem
them
right
are going to
now.
go along? When remember, you run for office as a congressman, and you say, if I'm elected, I will not raise taxes. Now, how do you then agree to a compromise in which you raise taxes? Or you run for office saying, if I'm elected, I'm going to soak the rich. I'm going to make those millionaires and billionaires pay. So how do you accept a deal that doesn't soak the rich and make those millionaires and billionaires pay? Because you know that if you differ from what you promised, you're going to have a primary opponent in 2 years who is going to accuse you of being a sellout and a phony, and he's going to knock you off in the primary, because who comes out and vote in the primary? The party people, the people who are most committed to what the party stands for. And if you deviate from that, there's going to be somebody back in your home district, or maybe half a dozen somebodies who are going to want to take a crack at you. So it's just I'm sure we all hope that these problems can be resolved, but essentially nothing changed in Washington. We have a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, Republican House. That's what we had a month ago before the election. So, when all said and done, nothing much changed.
Right.
Nothing much changed.
And possibly right there is possibly where Romney went, a difference was starting to come to each of us. Whenever he was asked a question to extend on it, such as, I have thousands of jobs and I have worked for thousands of people. I'm just going to say it isn't exactly how he said it. But when he would be asked what jobs, or share it with us, he didn't seem to have an answer back, except that we could all see that no matter what person wins, it takes a first whole year to even get their plan through. Possibly the second one to okay it. And so maybe that's what we, in general, heard and saw through Romney, that's why we took Obama back.
It could be. I think basically he ran a good campaign. I think he was a very attractive candidate. I think he had the qualifications.
I thought he showed a great...
He did great in the first debate.
Part of the problem Romney had, he was a little more to the center of the road than a lot of Republicans liked.
That's true.
And consequently, he had a problem trying to express the fact that he wanted to keep the ultra-right, I guess we put it, and still maintain a middle-of-the-road stance that he was portraying originally. And consequently, he was wavering between the two problems and couldn't get anywhere with it.
I think Romney, I understand what you're saying. I think Romney would have been a very conservative president. I think Romney is a very conservative man. But I think that one problem is there are some in the Republican Party who are never going to be happy with any nominee. No matter who the nominee is, he isn't conservative enough for them, and so they stay home because they figure they didn't get the guy that's this mythical candidate who's going to be the perfect candidate. And if they don't, he doesn't exist. And if Ronald Reagan were alive today, he wouldn't be conservative enough for them. They would say, well, he signed an abortion bill into law, and he used to be a Democrat, and he supported FDR. So you could make the same kinds of attacks on Ronald Reagan that were made on Mitt Romney. So
Reagan used to be a union leader too.
He was perfect. He was a union guy. He was a registered Democrat. I remember reading where he used to have violent arguments with Dick Powell. Dick Powell was a diehard Republican, and he used to argue with Reagan back in the days in the 40s when Reagan was a Democrat. So what I'm saying is, there are some in the party that are never going to be satisfied, and a lot of those folks stayed home. Yeah. And I think they made a major mistake. Obama's vote was down 8 million from the number of votes that he got the first time. It should have been easy to defeat him. It should have been easy to defeat him.
Well, there was not that much difference in the popular vote between the two candidates.
Yeah, it's 40. It's like 50.5 to 49.5. There's no mandate here. I mean, I remember when Richard Nixon got 60% of the vote, and the media didn't say he had a mandate to do anything. Reagan got 60% of the vote, and the media didn't say he had a mandate to do anything.
They're all Democrats.
So I don't see how Obama can claim that with 50.5% of the vote that he had and losing 8 million from what he had 4 years ago.
He doesn't have a mandate.
And I notice he has brought that point up as he.
Oh yeah, I won the election. Well, yeah, you won the election, but not by that much.
Right.
There's a great line. We just came through that anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there's a great line in the TV docudrama, The Missiles of October, where they're talking about Adlai Stevenson, and Bobby Kennedy says to Jack Kennedy, well, Jack, half the country thinks that Adlai should be president, and the president says, yes, Bob, and the other half thinks that Nixon should be president.
Good line.
And that's very true. That's
sense,
very true. And Kennedy at least understood that when the country is as evenly divided as it is today, nobody has a mandate to do anything, really. I mean, sure, you're the president, you're going to push your policies, but you can't thump the table and say, I've got the country behind me, because you've only got a little bit more of the country behind you than the other fellow who ran against you. He had half the country behind him, too. So.
But you've got a great
bunch. Remember, too, about Kennedy, he used the trickle-down theory. It was not his only theory.
Oh, yeah.
But the fact is that trickle-down theory works every time all else stays the same. That's the catch on it, So when you land-based trickle-down theory, you got to remember, if things change, trickle-down theory doesn't always work.
If John Kennedy were alive, I always like to say this, if John Kennedy, they talk about Reagan not being conservative enough. If John Kennedy were alive today, and he wanted to increase the defense budget, which was part of his platform, if he wanted to take a tougher stance against our enemies around the world, I mean, the Soviet Union's gone, but he wanted to be tougher on the Russians in the Cold War, and he wanted to have an across-the-board tax cut, including millionaires and billionaires, what kind of a reception would that get in the Democratic Party today? He'd be hooted off the stage today if he stood up and advocated that. So, both parties have moved away from where they used to be.
If I remember Samuelson, which was a economist, he said that the way to control the economy is through taxes and interest rates.
Right.
Now, if you increase the taxes, you stifle the growth.
Sure.
If you increase the interest rates, you stifle growth. Now, there's a limit to what you can do with it, but still, there's...
See, interest rates right now are down to zero. There's nothing they can do. The Fed can't do anything more in terms of interest. There's zero, and it's not spurring the economy. And a tax cut, I think, today is just a terrible idea.
And,
I can't do
private incentive, too, has
But the fact is, increasing the taxes on millionaires is not going to accomplish much at all.
No.
They already pay 60% of the taxes.
Let me make a I'm kind of going on here, but this is a point I think Romney shouldn't have been as defensive about. Everybody says the rich are not paying their fair share. Right, the last, I think 2010 is the last year that we have numbers available. The top 1% that we always hear about paid 40%, almost 40% of all the income taxes paid in the United States. The top 10% paid 80% of all the income taxes paid in the United States. And the bottom 50 percent paid zero.
Yeah.
Roughly half the people pay
Did not
zero.
have to pay taxes.
Now, I don't. People may disagree with me. I don't know how you can argue that the rich are not paying their fair share with those. I mean, how much more do you want the rich to pay? How much more are they supposed to pay?
Okay, now go back a little bit. England, years ago, they were taxing the rich to something like 95% or something like that.
And it killed the economy.
It killed the economy. They found out as they reduced the taxes, the economy went up and they collected more taxes.
That's right. That's right.
So there is a balancing point there
Check
somewhere.
and balance, yeah.
But where it is, I don't know. I'm not an economist.
Somebody once said, I never got a job from a poor man. The only person that ever hired me was a rich guy. I mean, who's going to invest? Who's going to buy the stocks and bonds to crank the economy up if it's not the rich?
Well, you got to have incentive. You got to have incentive in the monetary policy to do that. And the problem is we don't have a monetary policy, and the people are afraid to invest.
Definitely.
So if
what
we're
we're
going
business or we the lay people.
If the next 4 years are going to be more regulations on business and industry, more money being spent on windmills and higher taxes, if they put, I don't see how that helps the economy. It may make the folks that voted for President Obama feel good to soak the rich, but it isn't going to do any good for the economy.
It's not going to do any good for them either because they're still going to be out of a job.
Yeah.
And they're not going to get any money off the government because they don't have any money.
And the danger, the rich have options. The rich can shift money off. There are ways to get around the taxes. And the ultimate way is you just leave the country and find some place out there. If you're a billionaire, you can pull up stakes and move to some other country where the tax rates aren't as high.
And right there, we will lose our investment.
It's a tragedy. I mean, I'm an American. I'm an American. But if you drive people to that point,
let
me see. I'm not going to stay here and have my money, drained away from me.
And among us, since we can't go to an island or another country or whatever in affordability or family.
There are tax shelters out there at places to be more than happy to get these people to move in.
Right, and at the same time, we can start practicing that by being people who leave Illinois for another town.
That's happening.
That is
people
allowing
are fleeing
us to
New
live
York.
on what we make.
People are fleeing New York in
California,
droves. They're fleeing
Arizona.
all the high-tax states. People are moving out in droves.
Very much so. Many are coming back to possibly the little town they left because it doesn't look too bad anymore.
You can go to Wyoming. They have all kinds of room there. There's about 2 miles per person available.
There you are.
When I was a kid, New York was the biggest.
And gaining with the tax story,
New York was the biggest state in the Union for most of our history, the most populous state in the Union.
We always said the biggest.
Until the big government people really got their hooks into New York government and started jacking the tax rates higher and higher. New York City. New York today is third, I think, behind California and Texas, and its population is steadily going down.
Definitely.
And a lot of that is because people have fled New York, as now they're fleeing California for the same reason. California used to be a low-tax state.
And I think
now
Illinois might have the next...
Illinois is a disaster.
Yeah, I think,
Of course, Hurricane Sandy didn't help New York.
No.
I think people are going to say, it's going to happen again, and your tides are going higher, and the ocean level's going higher.
Right now, the insurance companies dealing with them are trying to stop them from rebuilding because they said this is just going to be something that's going to be a continuum. Maybe not immediately, but it's they're
probably
they're
every
through
20
with it.
years or so. Yeah,
that's right. And so you're even going to be told. You can't even rebuild, or you can't live here, or if you want to live here.
How many times can you keep rebuilding something? I mean, it's it's insane. There are places where I guess people were not intended to live. I mean, and how many times can you expect the insurance companies or the government to subsidize you to rebuild? There could be another hurricane 2 months from now, or next summer, or next fall that could sweep through there. And
I just heard there's going to be a nor'easter sometime this week again.
Right.
I mean, it isn't even years and months. It's one after the other.
A little parallel with the Southern Great Plains and the whole Dust Bowl story. These people are living far beyond where they should have been.
Everybody just thinks it happened in Kansas or that.
Yeah.
But it started
Yes.
across the whole
Well, you go
state.
down into Africa too. Now they're stripping the land bare there too because of overpopulation.
See?
It's happening in South America where the forests are being
Yeah.
demolished at an unbelievable rate. And some people say that's the lungs of the earth, and that the more of that forest that's destroyed, that it's going to diminish the air quality, the amount of oxygen in the air. But how do you tell a country, well, you can't build up and industrialize? Now we've industrialized. But
Right.
you,
But
Brazil,
you can't.
Brazil, no, you've got to keep your forests and everything because it's good for the rest. How do you can't tell a
Well,
country to do that.
the problem really is overpopulation. So your population has to go under control, which Republican Party and the Catholic Church and other ones say you can't have control. There's not even a choice of it. You're just not allowed to have it.
And then this is a generation of want and get, and you can't walk over there now and tell them we're going to go back to how it was 100 years ago, and we're going to start all over from that part. You understand that concept is, well, we want what you have. So you're not going to get the discipline anymore or the respect of a rule. And
it's true.
It's just such a contradiction of what we want, what we have to do to get what we want, and not have that morale end of it to say, well, let's get started. They want to go to the top and go backwards, but they don't want the trial of it.
I always like to see, people say if those politicians would all come together, and the statement I always like to make is, we are not divided because we have two political parties.
Not at all.
We have two political parties because we are divided.
That's
If everybody in the country agreed on everything, we wouldn't need two political parties. We just need one party.
Good point.
We have two parties
Right.
because there is this wide disagreement amongst the American people as to which direction we should
our
go.
autonomy should be more or less the
There's
self-government.
two parties except in the state of Illinois.
Chicago, except for Illinois,
State of Chicago.
I call this the great liberal backwater of Illinois,
Oh, Lord,
where money is never an object.
It is, never an object, even though we're out of it, huh?
And we're now, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the final moments of our program. I think you'll probably hear this broadcast after our great national holiday, but I'll just say we wish everyone a very blessed and happy Thanksgiving, and hope as you're listening to our show that you enjoyed this great and uniquely American holiday of Thanksgiving. It is, I think, a religious holiday because to whom are we giving thanks if not to God? So with that, I want to thank our panel. Why don't we quickly identify ourselves? Ken?
Oh, Al. Al Opitz.
I'm sorry. Ken? I think that Ken Little is not here.
Ken
Al.
Little. Okay.
Jeanette Frontier.
Rich Lang.
And I'm John Escachoco, and here, of course, under the tutelage of John DeVita here at the John DeVita Broadcast Center in an underground and unmarked location in the near northwest suburbs. We're here in our underground bunker, as it were. So thanks for listening as we've talked about the presidency, the greatest office in the greatest nation in the history of the world. Have a very blessed Thanksgiving. We'll be back next month in December, and we'll be talking about probably a holiday topic, probably about the Christmas season, I would imagine, maybe about Christmas in Chicago, Christmas movies, many of the things, and as I always say, it's not happy holidays, it's Merry Christmas. But have a very blessed and happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, John. We want to thank Kevin of JACK-FM 89.7, station WRHS Norwich, and Smooth FM 88.1, WRWX Harwood Heights, for broadcasting this program over the Ridgewood Radio Network. Listeners can access our recorded programs and a large number of other shows on the Internet at WindyCityHometown.com. Thank you for listening. This is your announcer, Rich Lang. Goodbye.
You have been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, November the 19th, the year 2012. This program was pre-recorded. Thanks for listening, and once again, happy Thanksgiving, everyone.